NBC Radio News on the Hour, brought to you by Wynn's friction-proofing products to correct and prevent car trouble from radiator to gas tank. Now here is Martin Agronsky, NBC News.
President Kennedy denounced critics of his foreign policy today as prone to confuse rhetoric with reality. On the second day of his Texas tour, the president used a Dallas speech to contend that those who advance seemingly swift and simple solutions to every world problem will end in endangering the nation's security. Though the president didn't mention Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater by name, there was no doubt his remarks were aimed at the man who is now regarded as the front runner for the Republican presidential nomination. Acting Commerce Secretary Franklin D. Roosevelt, Jr. has testified to the Senate Banking Committee that the U.S. will have to hurry its decision on selling surplus wheat to the Soviet Union, as the Russians have now set a May 21st deadline for beginning shipments. Roosevelt argued against the proposal of South Dakota Senator Munt to bar government-sponsored credit for wheat purchases by any communist nation. He contended this restriction would bar U.S. businessmen from getting a fair chance to win a part of Russia's annual $4 billion of trade with the free world. At the United Nations in New York, the 17 member states of the presently postponed Geneva Disarmament Conference voted to resume negotiations at Geneva next January 21st. And more news after this from Wynn's Friction Proofing.
Carefree driving begins with a can of Wynn's and a can of Wynn's today.
Did it happen this morning? Did you step on the gas and finally realize that the pep and zing your car used to have is gone? Sort of takes the joy out of driving, doesn't it? Well, there's a very good answer to your problem. It's called Wynn's Friction Proofing. Wynn's Friction Proofing restores a healthy measure of the pep your car has lost with age. It increases power and gas mileage, makes starting easier on cold mornings. But best of all, Wynn's Friction Proofing penetrates the surfaces of the moving parts inside your engine. It smooths and seals these parts to hold engine wear to an absolute minimum. Next time you stop for gas or service, add a can of Wynn's Friction Proofing to your crankcase. Your satisfaction is guaranteed, or your money back.
So add a can of Wynn's today.
Here again, Martin Agronsky.
A two-day conference between West Germany's Chancellor Erhard and France's President de Gaulle has ended, and a report from NBC's Bernard Frizzell in Paris.
West German Chancellor Ludwig Erhard made plain here today the German government's reliance upon the United States for its defense against the threat of Soviet aggression. That was the note on which Erhard wound up his two-day visit here to President de Gaulle. The French were reportedly careful not to present to Erhard a choice between themselves and the United States. But the Germans were said to be astonished at the sharply critical attitude of the French toward American policy. A joint communique called for all necessary efforts to get the common market moving forward again and to increase trade with the United States through the forthcoming Kennedy round of negotiations for tariff reduction. But no concrete agreements were announced. This is Bernard Frizzell, NBC News, Paris.
Democratic Senator George McGovern of South Dakota, home state of the Fisher quintuplets, has a letter from a constituent that he finds hard to answer. The constituent writes that he doesn't mind a bit all the gifts to the Fisher family, but that he feels he's being unfairly treated despite his similar circumstances. I've got 5 children, too, he complains to Senator McGovern, and just because mine came one at a time, no one has given me a cent. Michigan's Governor George Romney insisted today at the Midwest Governors Conference in Omaha that he is not seeking the Republican presidential nomination next year. This is Martin Agronsky, NBC News, Washington.
When your child is sick with a cold or flu, remember what doctors recommend: bed rest, plenty of fluids, and aspirin to reduce fever and relieve pains. When you give orange-flavored Bayer aspirin for children, your child will feel better fast. And knowing he feels better, so will you. Each tablet is the 1 1/4 grain dosage doctors recommend for children, and it gives you such confidence to know you're giving the best. So always give orange-flavored Bayer aspirin for children. This has been NBC News on the Hour. Listen again on the hour for NBC Radio News, brought to you by Bayer aspirin for children. Emphasis adds to your listening enjoyment. Weekdays on the NBC Radio Network.
This is Morgan Beatty, NBC News, Emphasis, the Ledger of Life, the man who was promoted from the highest office in the United States to a job of no importance. That observation on people and the times in a moment.
Enjoy those wonderful wines from Mogan David, Mogan David, Mogan David. Wonderful wines from Mogan David, Mogan David wines. The home sweet home wines you'll enjoy, delicious as can be. The wines like Grandma used to make bring back treasured memories. Enjoy those wonderful wines from Mogan David, Mogan David wines.
It's here, the cheeriest, cherriest wine you ever tasted. It's Mogan David Pure Cherry Wine. Not too sweet, not too tart. Any time's the right time to enjoy it. Mogan David Pure Cherry Wine.
Enjoy those wonderful wines from Mogan David like Grandma used to make.
Mogan David Cherry Wine, specially sweetened. Mogan David Wine Corporation, Chicago.
This is Morgan Beatty, Emphasis, the Ledger of Life, Dateline, Uvalde, Texas. A famous American, John Nance Garner, celebrates his 95th birthday today. He's not as hale and hearty as he has been, but mercifully, he is sharp in mind. When our hero was born, November the 22nd, 1868, the United States was still an infant among the great powers of the modern world. By 1893, John Nance Garner had earned the nickname that has stuck to him to this day, Cactus Jack. He has acquired a habit of life that may have had something to do with his lifespan. He acquired the habit of eating at least one grapefruit every day. And in 1893, Cactus Jack was elected to what he has called the most important job he ever held. That was superintendent of schools in his hometown. They never gave me credit for that in these biography books, he has said. No, the biographers regard Speaker of the House of Representatives as Jack Garner's biggest job. And when the little Texan became vice president under Franklin Roosevelt in 1933, he said, "I'm going from the biggest job in Washington, Speaker, to the littlest." Banker Garner became a Democrat instead of a Republican for several reasons. Texas was a natural sympathizer with Southern Democrats, and the stars of Cleveland and Bryan were rising over the landscape. They magnetized Jack Garner, galvanized him into political action. And in 1933, in the trough of the Depression, he looked upon Franklin Roosevelt as another Cleveland or Bryan, or even better. He loved the New Dealer to the end, even though he parted with him on the third-term issue and on economics. Cactus Jack recently decided to give much of his money, over $1 million, to educational institutions in Texas. To whispers that his relatives might be disappointed in that, he says, "It's my money. I'll do what I please with it." And those who thought Cactus Jack was kidding when he said he had given up both his cigars and his sour mash bourbon whiskey, he used to drink it by the glassful, at age 90, well, they were dead wrong. He has puffed a cigar only on rare ceremonial occasions since that time. He raises pecans, pheasant's eggs. He keeps hens to hatch the pheasant's eggs. He still wears khaki pants and shirt, both for every day and Sunday. And when Cactus Jack Garner sits in his rocking chair, in the setting sun in the afternoon, or in the shade of his porch at noontime, he keeps his belt unfastened for comfort. When he left Washington a generation ago, he vowed to make no meaningful political comments. Hardly a line of that kind of thing has appeared. But he has made no secret of his friendship for Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson and the late Speaker Sam Rayburn. Today, Cactus Jack keeps right up with the times. He has 2 television sets so he can watch 2 ball games at the same time. He hates nothing more than the fuss and feathers of a birthday celebration. One thing for certain, he wouldn't give up his afternoon nap for all the birthday celebrations in Christendom. Morgan Beatty, NBC News.
Here's a thought for Thanksgiving.
Have a heart-to-heart thought with the one you love, that special someone you're thinking of. Send flowers by wire, it's easy to do, through the FTD florist nearest you.
The Thanksgiving special at $7.50 is only one of 26 arrangements in the new Florist Telegraph Delivery Selection Guide, available at your FTD florist.
This is Morgan Beatty, Emphasis, the Ledger of Life, reminding you that Emphasis is heard 8 times daily, Monday through Friday, on this NBC station.
stations, this is a 30-second hotline bulletin talk-up. Just 25 seconds from now, we'll bring you a hotline bulletin dealing with the president. Several shots were fired near the president in Dallas. A hotline bulletin coming to you in 15 seconds. Stand by all NBC stations. A hotline bulletin in 10 seconds. A hotline bulletin in 5 seconds. This is an NBC News bulletin. Shots were fired near President Kennedy in Dallas. Here is a report from Robert McNeil, NBC News, with the presidential party in Dallas.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas. Crowds screamed and lay down on the grass. As the motorcade went by, police broke away and began chasing an unknown gunman across some railroad tracks. It was not known if the shots were aimed at the president. Repeat, it is not known if the shots were aimed at the president. This is Robert McNeil, NBC News in Dallas, Texas.
And here is a flash from the Associated Press in Dallas. The Associated Press reports that the president was seriously wounded. This is not confirmed. This is a flash. Repeat, this is a flash from the Associated Press in Dallas. They report that the president was seriously wounded by an assassin's bullets. This is an unconfirmed report from the Associated Press. I repeat, the Associated Press reports from Dallas that President Kennedy was seriously wounded by assassin's bullets in Dallas. This has been a hotline bulletin report from NBC News. Stand by for later developments as they become available. Stand by all NBC stations. This is a 30-second hotline bulletin talk-up. In just 25 seconds, we will bring you a further report on the reported shooting of the president in Dallas. This hotline report coming to you in 15 seconds. Stand by all NBC stations. A further report on the reported shooting in Dallas in 10. In 5 seconds, a bulletin hotline. This is an NBC News bulletin. There is a report from Dallas that President Kennedy has been shot. Here is a late report from Bob Thornton in Dallas.
Information is still sketchy at this time. We have just talked with two eyewitnesses, a man and his wife, who were standing near the president's motorcade. They said that a shot rang out from behind them. They thought at first it was a firecracker. Then, according to the eyewitnesses, one woman who was in a hysterical condition told us that the president was hit in the side of the head and fell into his wife Jacqueline's arms. He was rushed to Dallas Parkland Hospital. We have not had confirmation at this moment as to whether he was actually hit, his condition, or any further details. This is Bob Thornton in Dallas for NBC News.
And this has been a Hotline Special Report. Stay tuned to your NBC station for late-breaking developments on this story.
Stand by all NBC stations. This is a 30-second hotline bulletin talk-up. Just 25 seconds from now, we'll bring you a hotline bulletin dealing with the shooting of the president today in Dallas, Texas. In 15 seconds. In 10 seconds, we will bring you a special hotline bulletin. In 5 seconds. This is an NBC News bulletin. We take you now to Robert McNeil, NBC News in Dallas, Texas.
Several shots were fired today as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas. A police officer at the scene said he believed the president had been wounded and has been taken to hospital. People screamed and lay down in the grass as the shots were heard as the motorcade went by. Police immediately fanned out over a wide area. A small Negro boy and a white man said they had seen a man with a gun in the window of a building overlooking the route. This is Robert McNeil, NBC News in Dallas, Texas.
This has been a Hotline Special Report. Stay tuned to your NBC station for other Hotline reports and for the late developments on the NBC News on the Hour.
This is NBC News. Here is Peter Jfk'S in Washington.
President Kennedy has been shot. As of now, there is no final official report on his condition. Here now, piece together the news items we have as they have reached us from Dallas, Texas. Within the hour, President Kennedy and Texas Governor John B. Connally were cut down by would-be assassins' bullets as they toured downtown Dallas in an open automobile. Representative Albert Thomas, Democrat of Texas, says he's been informed the president and Governor Connally were both still alive after having been shot in an assassination attempt. Thomas, standing outside the corridor of the emergency room in which both Mr. Kennedy and Connally were under treatment, said he's been told the president was still alive, but in very critical condition. The president, his limp body cradled in the arms of his wife, was rushed to Parkland Hospital. The governor also taken to Parkland. A Secret Service agent, Clint Hill, a man assigned to protect Mrs. Kennedy, said he's dead as the president was lifted from the rear of a White House touring car, the famous bubble-top car which was sent to Dallas from Washington. He was rushed to an emergency room in the hospital. Other White House officials who were questioned about it say they were in doubt. The corridors of the hospital, of course, in pandemonium. The incident occurred just east of a triple underpass facing a park in downtown Dallas, Texas. Associated Press reporter Jack Bell reports 3 shots were fired as the presidential motorcade entered a triple underpass in Dallas that leads to the Stemmons Freeway. After the president was shot, the Secret Service waved the motorcade on at top speed to the nearby Parkland Hospital. Here in Washington, the White House press office said at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that it has nothing beyond press information on the shooting. Kennedy apparently was shot in the head. He fell face down in the back seat of his car. Blood was on his head. Mrs. Kennedy cried, "Oh no," and tried to hold up his head. Governor Connally remained half-seated in the car, slumped to the left. There was blood on his face and forehead. The president and the governor were rushed to the hospital as quickly as possible. Mr. Kennedy was to have made a speech at the Dallas Trade Mart, not far from the hospital. Reporters about 5 car lengths behind the chief executive heard what sounded like 3 bursts of gunfire. Secret Service agents in a follow-up car quickly unlimbered their automatic rifles and their pistols, but the damage apparently has been done or had been done. We switch now for a direct report to Robert McNeil, NBC News, Dallas.
President Kennedy was shot at today by a gunman from a building along the route as he drove through downtown Dallas. He has been rushed to hospital bleeding. Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough says the president is seriously wounded. Mrs. Kennedy, who was sitting beside him in the open car, was not hurt, but the governor of Texas, John Connally, was also reported wounded. As the shots rang out, 3 shots as the motorcade went by, people screamed and lay down on the grass. Police immediately fanned out over a wide area. They found several witnesses, including a small boy, who said he saw a man in the window of a building overlooking the parade route with a gun in his hand. The President Kennedy is now in the Parkland Memorial Hospital. An accurate estimate of his condition has not been given. Congressman Yarborough of Texas says only that the president is seriously wounded. This is Robert McNeil, NBC News, at the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Texas.
The Secret Service says the president remained in the emergency room. The governor has been moved to the general operating room of Parkland Hospital in Dallas. One Secret Service man was overheard telling another there is no need to move the president because emergency facilities are entirely adequate in the emergency room. 2 Roman Catholic priests have been summoned to the emergency room where the president is, one identified as a Father Huber. Again, the president and the governor of Texas have been shot, both in critical condition in Dallas, Texas. Peter Hackus, NBC News, Washington.
Now here is Edwin Newman, NBC.
The latest word on President Kennedy's condition comes from Representative Albert Thomas of Texas. He says he's been informed that Mr. Kennedy is still alive, but in very critical condition. 2 Roman Catholic priests have been summoned to the room where Mr. Kennedy is lying. Here is a bulletin just in. President Kennedy has been given blood transfusions at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. That is where he is lying. This is an effort to save his life. The president is at Parkland Hospital after the assassination attempt against him and Governor John Connally of Texas. The president was shot in the head. Governor Connally was shot in the chest. He has been taken to the operating room. The president remains in the room to which he was originally taken because emergency facilities there are said to be completely adequate. To repeat, the president remains in the emergency room at the Parkland Hospital in Dallas because emergency facilities in that room are considered to be perfectly adequate. The president has been given blood transfusions in an attempt to save his life. 2 Roman Catholic priests have been summoned to that emergency room. A White House spokesman said someone had asked for the priests. We have not yet been told who sent for them. To recapitulate today's events, a sniper shot President Kennedy and also Governor John Connally of Texas, with whom the president was riding as they drove through downtown Dallas today. Mr. Kennedy apparently was shot in the head, and he fell face down in the back seat of his car. It was an open car. Blood was on his head. Mrs. Kennedy was by his side. She was not hurt. She was heard to cry, "Oh no," and she tried to hold up the president's head. Governor Connally remained half-seated, slumped to the left. There was blood on his face and forehead. There was also blood on his chest. The president and the governor were then rushed to the Parkland Hospital near the Trade Mart in Dallas, Texas. The president was to speak at the Dallas Trade Mart in the course of his 3-day visit to Texas. Today was the 2nd day. Blood was spattered all over the limousine, which had been flown in especially to carry the president in the Dallas welcoming parade. Secret Service men at once drew their weapons, but it was too late to prevent the damage that had been done. I repeat, the president is still alive, but he is said by Representative Albert Thomas of Texas, one of his hosts in Dallas, to be in very critical condition. The corridors of the hospital are described by those who were there as in pandemonium. At the height of the drama in the emergency room where the president is lying, a weeping Negro woman bearing a small, bloody child rushed into the hospital. A nurse and an intern went quickly to her side. Mrs. Kennedy, as I have said before, is safe, but she is stunned by what has happened. Mrs. Connally also appears to be safe. She is stunned also. We will, of course, continue with our news bulletins moment by moment as they come to us. We now join the facilities of NBC Television for a simultaneous broadcast. NBC correspondent Bill Ryan is speaking.
Window of a building about a block away from the cars. There are other reports that a man was seen with a high-powered rifle. There is no indication yet that whoever fired the shots at the president and the Texas governor has been found. The word from Parkland Memorial Hospital is that President Kennedy is being treated in an emergency room of the hospital, that he has received blood transfusions, that he is in critical condition but alive. There is no word on how many times he was struck by bullets or where he sustained the wounds. Now, we are going to attempt once more to return to station WBAP-TV, Fort Worth, Dallas, and newsman Charles Murphy.
There is no definite word yet that the person who fired the shots at President Kennedy and Governor Connally in Dallas has been apprehended. We have just received this report, though. Moments ago, authorities took a young man into custody. They took him to the county sheriff's office near the Triple Overpass, near where the shooting occurred. The man was neatly dressed. He's in his early 20s. He is protesting vehemently his innocence, and he says that he has witnesses to prove that he is innocent. 2 Roman Catholic priests have been summoned to the emergency room where the president is. A White House spokesman said someone had asked for the priest, but did not say whom. Blood transfusions have been administered to President Kennedy. Governor Connally has been moved to the general operating room. Repeating, just moments ago, authorities have taken a young man into custody in Dallas, but there is no definite word that this is the person who might have fired the shots at President Kennedy and Governor Connally. Charles Murphy reporting from WBAP-TV, Fort Worth, Dallas.
These additional details from the hospital in Dallas. Officials at the hospital say the president has been given a transfusion of B-positive blood. They are calling for fresh blood of that type to have it ready if additional transfusions were needed. Mrs. Lyndon Johnson, the wife of the vice president, was escorted by Secret Service agents into the emergency room where the president is being treated. Now, for Washington reaction to this tragic story, we go to NBC News Washington and David Brinkley.
Bill, there isn't a great deal as yet because obviously the news has just got here. It was taken to Congress, which of course recessed immediately to wait to see what has happened. We've checked with the White House, which has told us it doesn't know any more than we know, and in fact has been listening to us to see what it could find out. The president's brother, Edward Kennedy, Teddy Kennedy, was on the floor of the Senate and was informed of the news by the Senate Democratic leader, Senator Mike Mansfield. The only word beyond that we have is that Senator Kennedy didn't know at the moment whether he would go to Texas or not. Beyond that, again, there is no particular or unexpected reaction here yet because most of Washington has just found out about it and is shocked and stunned along with everyone else. The White House, again, has no more information at the moment than we have. We'll stay here, of course, ready to bring you any at the moment it arrives. In the meantime, we'll switch back to you, Chet, Frank, Bill.
This is NBC News with the last-minute word on President Kennedy's condition. For that, we switch to Alan Bickley, station WFAA in Dallas.
President Kennedy has been shot during his tour of the city of Dallas, Texas. A presidential aide, Larry O'Brien, said he had no information on whether the president is alive, but later reports indicate from Parkland Hospital in Dallas that the president is alive, although said to be critical. This is an unconfirmed report that the president is critical. Texas Governor John Connally also was shot, has been taken to surgery in Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. When the president was shot, Mrs. Kennedy jumped up and grabbed him, crying, "Oh no." Then the Secret Service ordered the motorcade to speed on to the hospital. Apparently, from witnesses at the scene, we can deduce that the attempted assassination was committed by a slender, white young man, about 30 years of age, probably from the vicinity of the Texas Book Depository building in downtown Dallas. Police and Secret Service men have now cordoned off that building. The center of downtown Dallas is in a virtual state of siege. They are combing the floors of the Texas Book Depository building in an effort to find the suspected assassin. This is Alan Bickley reporting for NBC News.
There has been an unconfirmed report, and I stress an unconfirmed report, that Vice President Lyndon Johnson was slightly wounded during the attempt on President Kennedy. One spectator said he saw Vice President Johnson walk into the hospital holding his arm. That is the first word we've had on that, and we have no official indication that Vice President Johnson has been hurt. To repeat, the latest word we have is that President Kennedy is still alive, but in critical, very critical condition. That word comes from Representative Albert Thomas of Texas, who has been one of the president's hosts during his intended 3-day visit to Texas. The president is in the emergency room. He has had blood transfusions. More blood of that particular type has been called for by the hospital. It is B-positive blood drawn from the hospital bank. Fresh blood has been called for by the doctors to have it ready if additional transfusions are needed. Governor John Connally of Texas, who was riding with the president and was wounded at the same time that the president was, has been taken to the operating room. Mr. Kennedy continues to be in the emergency room. Facilities there are said to be adequate. We will be back with additional information as soon as we receive it. This is Edwin Newman, NBC News. I beg your pardon, I am told to continue because there is a bit more information. At the hospital in Dallas, police have been quickly posted in the corridors leading to the emergency room. Secret Service agents are on duty and have turned reporters away 40 feet from the door of the emergency room where the president is lying critically ill. Now, for reaction here in New York to the news of the assassination attempt against President Kennedy, who is in critical condition in Dallas, Texas, we switch to Joseph Michaels at the Stock Exchange in Wall Street.
The stock exchange itself has just suspended trading. A Board of Governors meeting was called by Keith Funston immediately after the terrible news was received, and the decision after the market was running slow and it tumbled about 2.5 points, 12 minutes behind on the ticker, with many issues suspending immediately, was that the market itself should suspend. I'm down here at Wall Street. There are lots of people here. Perhaps we can talk to some of them. Excuse me, but did you hear the news, sir?
Not quite. I couldn't hear. I was standing all the way out here.
How about you?
I didn't hear anything. I just was.
Did you know what happened?
Yes, I know.
How do you feel about it?
I don't know. It's shocked.
Very bad.
Terrible shock to the country and everything else. I don't know. It's unbelievable to think something like that could happen.
Do you think it's a dangerous thing for us all?
I certainly do.
Where was the FBI? How do you think the street will react to this, sir?
Well, I guess the market will go down. It always does in a tragedy.
The vote in critical condition, huh? So we hear tell. Do you think this will have any serious effect on the market, sir?
On what?
On the market?
I doubt it.
Why?
Well, I'd have to say, I doubt very seriously.
The general condition of people here was that the ones that we've talked to so far was that this is an awful thing.
This is Edwin Newman, NBC News in New York. We have an interview with an eyewitness to the shooting of President Kennedy in Dallas. I must repeat now, the president is still alive, but is described as being in very critical condition in the hospital in Dallas. He has been given blood transfusions. 2 Roman Catholic priests have been summoned to the emergency room in the hospital where the president is lying. Now, we're going to let you hear an interview with an eyewitness to the shooting that took place in Dallas a short time ago.
What is your name, ma'am?
Jane Hill.
From Dallas?
That's right.
And did you see the shooting, miss?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe what happened?
Yes, sir.
Will you do that now?
They were driving along, and we were the only people in this area on our side, and the shots came from directly across the street from us. And just as the president's car became directly even with us, we took one look at him, and he was sitting there. He and Jackie were looking at a dog that was in the middle of the seat, and about that time 2 shots rang out just as he looked up. This is the president looked up, and these 2 shots rang out, and he grabbed his chest, and it looked like he was in pain, and he fell over in his seat, and Jackie fell over on him and said, "My God, he's been shot." And after that, more shots rang out, and the car sped away.
Now, what kind of a car was that?
What kind of a car was it? The president's car.
I mean, where did the shots come from?
The shots came from the hill.
From the hill?
Yes. It was just east of the underpass.
And
we were on the south side.
Did you look up there where the shots came from, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Could you see anyone?
I thought I saw this man running, but I looked at the president, and for a while, and I looked up there, and I thought I saw a man running, and so right after that, I guess I didn't have any better sense. I started running up there too.
And what is your name?
Jean Hill.
G-E-A-N?
J-E-A-N.
J-E-A-N. Where's What's your address, Miss Hill?
9402 Bluff Creek.
9402 Bluff.
This is the NBC newsroom in New York with the latest news about the assassination attempt on President Kennedy. The president is in Parkland Hospital in Dallas, where an attempted assassination against him was executed about an hour ago. The president is in very critical condition. He apparently was shot in the head. Mr. Kennedy has had blood transfusions. 2 Roman Catholic priests were called to the emergency room where he is lying. We do not know who called them there. Governor John Connally, who was in the car with the president, also was shot. He has been taken to the operating room in the hospital. An assistant to Governor Connally said he asked him how it happened, and the governor replied, "I don't know. I guess from the back they got the president too." The governor was shot just below the shoulder blade in the back. There had been a report that Vice President Lyndon Johnson was slightly wounded. We now hear from Mrs. Lyndon Johnson, the Vice President's wife, that the Vice President is fine. Asked whether her husband had been wounded, she shook her head negatively. Mrs. Kennedy was riding with the president when he was wounded. She cried, "Oh no," as she saw him shot and cushioned his head as he fell. Now, for the latest details, we switch live to station WFAA in Dallas. This is the NBC newsroom in New York. We try again to get the latest details from station WFAA in Dallas. Well, we're having trouble making connections with station WFAA in Dallas for the moment. We now join the NBC television network telecast for the latest information.
Anxious members of the White House staff gathered, including Major General Chester V. Clifton, military aide to the President, and Brigadier General Godfrey McHugh, the Air Force aide. Mrs. Evelyn Lincoln, the President's Secretary, Pamela Tenure, Press Secretary to Mrs. Kennedy, and other members of the staff were shown to a special waiting room not far from the emergency room area where the President was lying. As Frank McGee has reported on direct word from our correspondent in Dallas, a crowd is gathering outside Parkland Hospital in Dallas.
There's also this, Chet, repeating what we got from Fort Worth, that sheriff's officers have taken a young man into custody and are questioning him, but there is no indication that any charges have been placed against him. There is no indication that he is directly involved in this attempt on the life of President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally.
Bill, I think we have a picture of the President and Mrs. Kennedy as they arrived in Dallas this morning, and I have some fragmentary copy on the first speech which the President delivered in Dallas. This is the picture of the President and Mrs. Kennedy.
I think the camera that has you, Chet, is the one that would have to get the picture.
Me. I'll hold it up over here. This is the picture of the first family, or the President and Mrs. Kennedy, rather, arriving in Dallas only a couple of hours before the assassination attempt. The first speech that the President delivered in Dallas, speaking in an area where supporters are booming Senator Barry Goldwater's chances for the Republican nomination, the President said that ignorance and misinformation, if allowed to prevail in foreign policy, handicaps the country's security. This was a speech prepared for the Dallas Citizens Council, the Dallas Assembly, and the Graduate Research Center of the Southwest. He did not specifically mention Senator Goldwater by name. The President said, "In a world of complex and continuing problems, in a world full of frustrations and irritations, America's leadership must be guided by the lights of learning and reason, or else those who confuse rhetoric with reality and the plausible with the possible will gain the ascendancy with their seemingly swift and simple solutions to every world problem."
Chet, there's also this. In Washington, the two president's brothers, his two brothers, Attorney General Robert Kennedy and his younger brother, Senator Edward Kennedy, are on their way to Andrews Air Force Base. They will fly to Dallas. Additional details from the hospital. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has not been injured in this attack on President Kennedy and Texas Governor Connally. The Vice President is somewhere in the same hospital where the President is being treated, Parkland Memorial in Dallas. It is reported he is badly shocked by the shooting, that doctors are trying to keep him as quiet as possible, and that he is under heavy Secret Service and police protection. It's also noted that throughout the trip in Texas, when the President and the Vice President have been in the same motorcade, they have been kept in separate cars, a precaution against just such an attempt as was obviously made today. Chet?
I referred a moment ago and read an excerpt from the speech which President Kennedy delivered to a breakfast crowd this morning earlier. The breakfast crowd of 2,200 people rose in ovation after the speech, and a few minutes later, the President said he felt like he did in France 2 years ago when he identified himself as the man who accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. Do you have anything else, Frank?
Yes, there was just excuse me just a moment, John. There was just word from the hospital that they had dispatched a call for a neurosurgeon. I understand would indicate that one of the two had been hit in the head, would it not?
Or either the head or possibly some spinal damage. There is also this, understandably, in a situation like this, the information comes in fragments and comes from unexpected places and uncontrolled angles. Senator Ralph Yarborough, Texas Democrat, who was in a nearby car when the attack took place on the President, said he saw the President's lips moving at what he called a normal rate of speed while Mr. Kennedy was being rushed to the hospital. How much it means, we do not know.
This is Edwin Newman in the NBC newsroom in New York. This information from Dallas. President Kennedy was given the last holy rites of the Roman Catholic Church today. That was, of course, after he was shot down by a would-be assassin while he was riding in a caravan through downtown Dallas. A Catholic priest who helped perform the last rites said he did not believe the president was dead. The Catholic priest, in other words, said he believed the president was still alive. The priest left the emergency operating room at Parkland Hospital, where the president is lying, and walked out of the hospital. We hear from Washington that Attorney General Robert Kennedy and the president's youngest brother, Senator Edward Kennedy, are on their way to Andrews Air Force Base to catch a plane for Dallas. Also in Washington, the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, has, of course, instructed the Dallas office of the FBI to make an all-out investigation of the attempt on the life of President Kennedy and of Governor John Connally of Texas. Governor Connally was shot in the back below the shoulder blade. Here is a flash from Dallas. Two priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds suffered in the assassination attempt today. I repeat, a flash from Dallas. Two priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. We are, of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us. I will repeat with the greatest regret this flash. Two priests who were with President Kennedy say he has died of bullet wounds. Now we join the NBC television network for the latest news.
Now, there apparently is word that this AP flash, this report from the two priests, that the president has died of bullet wounds, is confirmed. We will attempt now to get to station WBAP-TV in Fort Worth, Dallas, for confirmation. We go to newsman Tom Murphy.
Substantiating this, but not confirming it, is a report about 5 minutes ago by the Dallas Police Department to all of its officers that the president had died. Some 3 to 5 minutes later, the AP flashed that two priests at the hospital say the president is dead. Charles Murphy, returning now to NBC in New York.
Word from two sources. Again, it is not...
Bill, excuse me. We have NBC's Bob McNeil on the line now with the report. Please go ahead, Bob. White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy
died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
After being shot at.
After being shot.
By an unknown assailant.
By an unknown assailant.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
The president died.
The president died.
Approximately 25 minutes.
Approximately 25 minutes.
After the attack took place.
After the attack took place.
He had been rushed, bleeding and unconscious.
He had been rushed, bleeding and unconscious.
To the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
To the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
And was given blood transfusions.
And was given blood transfusions.
About 15 minutes ago.
About 15 minutes ago, reports NBC's Bob McNeil from Dallas, to whom I'm talking now.
A priest emerged.
A priest emerged.
After having given the president.
After having given the president.
The last rites.
The last rites.
Just before the announcement of the president's death was made.
Just before the announcement of the president's death was made.
Vice President Lyndon Johnson.
Vice President Lyndon Johnson.
Emerged grim-faced.
Emerged grim-faced.
And was driven off with a police escort.
And was driven away with a police escort.
To assume.
To assume.
The constitutional responsibilities.
The constitutional responsibilities.
Of the presidency.
Of the presidency.
A casket.
A casket.
Has just been brought into the emergency ward.
Has just been brought into the emergency ward.
Of this hospital.
Of this hospital.
For President Kennedy.
For President Kennedy.
The attack took place.
The attack took place.
As the president was just completing.
As the president was just completing.
What amounted to.
What amounted to.
A triumphal drive.
A triumphal drive.
Through downtown Dallas.
Through downtown Dallas.
Encountering the biggest.
Encountering the largest.
And in some ways the most friendly crowds.
And in some ways the most friendly crowds.
Of his two-day Texas tour.
Of his two-day Texas tour.
Dallas police.
Dallas police.
Had put into effect. The most stringent security precautions in the city's history.
The most stringent security precautions in the city's history.
Because they had anticipated.
Because they had anticipated.
There might be some demonstrations.
There might be some demonstrations.
Against President Kennedy.
Against President Kennedy.
Like those which marked the visit.
Similar to those which marked the visit
of UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson.
Of UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson.
On October 24th.
On October 24th.
Mrs. Kennedy.
Mrs. Kennedy.
Who was sitting beside the president.
Who was sitting beside the president.
In the open car.
In the open car.
Was not hurt.
Was not hurt.
However, the governor of Texas.
However, the governor of Texas.
John Connally.
John Connally.
Who was also in the car.
Who was also in the car.
Was wounded, reportedly in the chest.
Was wounded, reportedly in the chest.
And more blood.
A repeat, Bob.
Further supplies of blood.
Further supplies of blood.
For transfusions for the governor.
For transfusions for the governor.
Have just been brought into the hospital.
Have just been brought into the hospital.
The shooting came.
The shooting came.
According to witnesses.
According to witnesses.
From the second floor.
From the second floor.
Of a building called the Texas School Book Depository.
Called the Texas School Book Depository.
Which is about 100 yards.
Which is about 100 yards.
From the tree-lined parkway.
From the tree-lined parkway.
On which the president was driving when the shooting occurred.
On which the president was driving when the shooting occurred.
3 shots were heard.
3 shots were heard.
Frank, that's about all I can tell you at the moment.
Bob, thank you very much. We'll keep the line open.
Okay, we'll keep the line open.
That was a report from NBC's Robert McNeil at the hospital in Dallas, Texas, confirming by way of word from the White House press secretary that President Kennedy is dead.
The death, according to Malcolm Kilduff, who was acting as the president's secretary on this trip, came roughly 39 minutes ago at about 1 o'clock Dallas time. There is further word that Vice President Lyndon Johnson was taken from the hospital and he was not wounded. He has been taken from the hospital off to a secluded place. He will assume the constitutional duties, succeeding now the late John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the former president, the late president of the United States. Now, it is necessary, even at a time when an event is fresh upon us, to look forward. We will do that now as we go to NBC
You're on
Washington,
teaching, Bob.
And David Brinkley.
I'm relaying. Right, I'm relaying your word.
Hello.
whole situation is, of course, that the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, will be given the oath of office as President of the United States as soon as it can be done. I haven't had time to check this, but I believe the oath can be administered by anyone who can, Justice of the Peace or anyone who can administer an oath. Had it happened in less unfortunate circumstances, he normally would be sworn in by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But in this case, he will be sworn in by anyone who has the power to do it. That means, therefore, that Lyndon Johnson will be President of the U.S. and will finish out Mr. Kennedy's term running until January of 1964. What happens then, obviously, we don't know. The next in line for the presidency then, after Mr. Johnson, becomes John McCormick of Massachusetts, Representative John McCormick of Massachusetts, who is the Speaker of the House. He is, as I say, next in line. We were told a few minutes ago the Air Force had 4 jet airplanes on the ramp at nearby Andrews Air Force Base, ready to take off for Texas, and perhaps by this moment they have. I don't know.
This is Edwin Newman in the NBC newsroom in New York. We switch at once to Robert Goralski, NBC News, at the White House in Washington. There's some delay in getting to Robert Goralski at the White House in Washington, who will give us the latest information from there about the death of President Kennedy by assassination in Dallas. Now we switch to Robert Goralski at the White House in Washington.
Secretary of State Dean Rusk has just been... It's just been announced here at the White House that Secretary of State Dean Rusk and several other cabinet members who were en route to Japan from the mainland United States have been ordered to return. They were about 1 or 2 hours from Hawaii en route to a conference in Tokyo. Also aboard the aircraft is Presidential Press Secretary Pierre Salinger. It's not known yet whether the plane carrying Secretary of State Rusk and Mr. Salinger will return to Dallas or come back to Washington directly. There is still no verification or confirmation here at the White House of the reported death of President Kennedy. The staff that has remained behind here at the White House is getting its information via radio and television. They have no further information. Attempts are being made now by press officials here at the White House, pressed into service because of the lack of the ordinary persons that newsmen would contact, to reach Kenneth O'Donnell, presidential assistant, or Malcolm Kilduff of the White House press staff. The children of President and Mrs. Kennedy are presumed to be on the second floor at the White House at this hour. This was a school day for young Caroline in the first grade. John Jr. is also believed to be in the White House. They were to go to Middleburg, Virginia tomorrow for the weekend, at which time they were to join the President and Mrs. Kennedy. Here at the White House, the secretaries are ashen-faced. They're on the verge of tears, and I might add reporters are feeling the same way and look the same way. Robert Goralski, NBC News at the White House.
The last rites were administered to President Kennedy by Father Oscar Huber of Holy Trinity Church in Dallas. Of course, at this point, the information that comes to us is fragmentary. It has all to be pulled together. There was an eyewitness description of the scene from a man who was 15 feet away when the president was shot. This man is Charles Brehm, B-R-E-H-M. He said the president was waving and the first shot hit him, and that awful look crossed his face. The president died 44 minutes ago, 1 o'clock Central Standard Time in Parkland Hospital in Dallas, the result of an assassination attempt against him as he was riding through the streets of Dallas in a car with his wife, with Governor John Connally of Texas, and with Mrs. Connally. Mrs. Kennedy and Mrs. Connally are safe, though the last word we've had describes both of them as stunned. Governor Connally was wounded. He was shot in the back below the shoulder blade, was taken to the emergency operating room. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who was not injured and who was riding in a separate car from that in which Mr. Kennedy was riding, was taken from Parkland Hospital under heavy police escort. He is to be sworn in as the next president of the United States. This attempt on President Kennedy's life was the third within 30 years on an American president. President Franklin Roosevelt was shot at when riding in an open car in Miami with Mayor Anton Cermak of Chicago. The president was not hit. Cermak died. President Truman was shot at when he was in Blair House in Washington. He was not hit. President Kennedy was shot at today and was killed. At this point, we join the NBC television network.
The United States was in a car behind the Kennedys and the Conleys. He is to be sworn into office as soon as possible. He rushed to the hospital and then was whisked away again by Secret Service men. His whereabouts, certainly, and as we can understand, is being kept secret.
Yes.
Kennedy lived about an hour after a sniper cut him down as his limousine left downtown Dallas. Automatically, of course, the mantle of the presidency falls now to Lyndon B. Johnson, a native Texan who had been riding 2 cars behind the chief executive. Here's one other little bit of information. The priests came out of the ward at approximately 1:37 p.m. Central Standard Time. The announcement by the 2 priests brought audible sobs from a crowd of scores of newsmen and other citizens crowded around the emergency ward entrance of the hospital. Senator Ralph Yarborough of Texas, talking only a few minutes before to the newsmen, collapsed in sobs as he told of witnessing the slaying of the president. Yarborough said he was in the 3rd car behind the president. It seemed to him, he said, that at least 2 of the shots came from the right rear. He said he couldn't say anything about the 3rd shot. So, that is the story. The President of the United States is dead. The new President is President Lyndon Johnson. The memories of, I suppose, all of us are flashing back to that warm April spring day of 1945 when we lost the wartime President Franklin D. Roosevelt. For many of us, this is the 2nd time around that we have been through one of these crises. The last shooting incident, not fatal, involving a president occurred in 1950 when President Harry S. Truman was in office and was living in Blair House in Washington. The White House was being renovated at that time. You may recall that 2 Puerto Rican nationalists tried to gun their way into Blair House and assassinate President Truman, who was taking a nap at the time on the 2nd floor.
In New York. An eyewitness to the shooting, fatal shooting of President Kennedy today was NBC cameraman John Hofen. John, where were you when it happened?
Actually, Ed, I was along with the NBC cameraman Dave Wigman in a car, roughly 4 cars behind the president in the motorcade. We were just leaving the business district of Dallas when this shooting took place.
What did you see, John? What was the first you knew?
Well, we were making a sweeping curve here on the roadway approaching a freeway when the first shot rang out. Our first reaction was that some teenager had fired a cherry bomb. When the second one rang out, we sort of felt that there was something wrong. That people started to drop down to the ground ahead of us, roughly 50 to 60 feet, up near the president's car. Then there was a third, and if I remember correctly, a 4th shot. Immediately after that last shot, the president's car took off a tremendous burst of speed, followed by the Secret Service follow-up car, which we call it, and being led by a squadron of motorcycle policemen.
That was to take the president to the hospital.
To the hospital, that's right. Our portion of the motorcade had remained behind momentarily. A cameraman had jumped out of the car and were making pictures. We did not know at that moment who had been shot or who was doing the shooting. So naturally, we were shooting everything, any people on the ground or running.
John, just let me interrupt to tell the audience that you are John Hofen, NBC cameraman. You are an eyewitness to the fatal assassination attempt of the president today.
Cameraman, I'm part of the NBC White House camera crew. Yes, I'm the sound man. Now, I would like to add this. We then regained composure, I should say, and jumped back into the car, and our driver took off. As we drove about 50 feet, we picked up one Secret Service agent who had been left behind in the rush. He jumped in the car with us, and we took off very fast at a high rate of speed to catch up to the president's car, but it was almost impossible. They must have been driving at I would say 90 or 100 miles an hour with him.
John, when the shooting happened, did you actually see the president or Governor Connally? Could you see anybody in that car?
No, unfortunately for us. The president's car was the first car in the motorcade immediately behind the motorcycle escort. Right behind the car is this large open Cadillac limousine, which is, I would say, has about 6 or 8 Secret Service men in it. They immediately stood up and blocked the view, and then, of course, they surrounded the car, and then when they saw what actually happened, they jumped back into this car and went, right behind his in this fast takeoff.
Did you see any police activity directed toward the assassin?
Yes. 2 or 3 of the motorcycle policemen went running up this embankment. Actually, it was a high, long, gray terrace towards this office building. And one of them became so excited he fell off of his motorcycle and it charged up the grass a portion of the way. But they ran through there. We never were able to find out what they did. I since have heard that they have picked up a few suspects.
Yes, we've heard that. We do not know, however, of any charges that have been made against anybody.
When we arrived at the hospital at, I would say, roughly 3 or 4 minutes behind the president, we were stopped at the emergency entrance, naturally, by the state police, city police, and a few Secret Service who were still down on the lower level. And the Secret Service men who knew us asked us to please remain there, that they would do whatever they could to help us. Just as I was leaving with home in my pocket to make a delivery to go on the air, Malcolm Kilduff, the Associate Press Secretary on the President's staff, came over and quietly said, John, he said, they tell me the President has died. We did not have a strict confirmation at that moment, and of course I have been roughly a block and a half away from the hospital now since talking to him and talking to you.
Thank you very much, John. I must interrupt you because we want to switch to Robert Goralski at the White House in Washington.
The American flag above the White House has just been lowered to half-mast, a solemn confirmation of the death of President Kennedy. As the flag was lowered, large numbers of people outside the White House noted the flag flying at half-mast. Most of them did not know what had happened. They talked to the White House guards, who had then informed them the President of the United States is dead. Large numbers of people out there now, probably about 400 or 500. They're standing, watching the activity as limousines come into the west side of the White House. Senator Hubert Humphrey arrived about 20 minutes ago. Reporters are still coming in, photographers. There's been contact with various congressmen, but still nothing more official about plans for President Lyndon Johnson to assume the office. This is Robert Goralski, NBC News at the White House.
This is Morgan Beatty, NBC News, New York, taking over from this time. There's considerable confusion as to exactly where these rifle shots came from. As we could tell from our report down in Dallas from our own staff man, it's not clear whether or not they came from a building or from an area close to the underpasses, a triple group of underpasses, or whether it came from a building. Now, Senator Yarborough of Texas is giving us this kind of information. These are quotes. These are quotes from the senator just right after the assassination occurred. You could tell, he said, that something awful and tragic had happened. He said, I could see a Secret Service man in the president's car, leaning on the car with his hands in anger, anguish, and despair. I knew something tragic had happened. Yarborough had counted 3 rifle shots, others have said there were 2, as the presidential limousine left downtown Dallas through a triple underpass. The shots were fired from above. Now that we're sure of. Possibly from one of the bridges or from a nearby building. That's the senator's view. But another witness, television reporter, said he saw a gun emerge from an upper story of a warehouse commanding an unobstructed view of the presidential car. We've already had fleeting references to this warehouse building and a gun emerging from a window. So you see, we still don't have enough information, and there are people under arrest. The sheriff's office in Dallas has several persons under arrest. And, of course, the standard report is that they have a white man, about 30 years old, under arrest, and a rifle has been recovered from the scene of the shooting, and it was a foreign-made rifle. Of course, this kind of reporting is very difficult at this time. The police themselves are busy trying to organize, along with the Secret Service and other government agencies, the federal Bureau of Investigation, John Edgar Hoover, has issued orders to his men to cooperate, and they have not yet coordinated all of the information they have. But it's quite certain that they have a great deal more information about the assassination of President Kennedy than they are revealing at this time. And now we switch to John Lavacek in Miami.
Havana Radio has just broken into its regular news broadcast with a bulletin and is broadcasting the news of President Kennedy's death to the Cuban people. The radio announcer, a woman, is broadcasting the regular United Press International dispatch from the United States. She is detailing all of the information she has at this time. This is John Lavacek, NBC News in Miami.
It's also clear from the reports we have that the Secret Service agents assigned directly to the president, that is, the men in the car or around the car with him, were almost certain he had been killed from the beginning. The president was shot, we can now either repeat or confirm, through the right temple, and the bullet went cleanly through his head. The White House physician has now stated it was a simple case of a bullet straight through the head. At least one Secret Service man at the entrance of the hospital kept murmuring. One of Mrs. Kennedy's Secret Service men kept murmuring as the car went up to the hospital and the president's body was being taken out that he's dead, he's dead. I'm sure he didn't know at that time he was dead, but Secret Service men know you can't be shot through the head, temple to temple, without being about as close to death as a man can be. And the question of administering the oath to the Vice President, Mr. Johnson, has still not been resolved, but the Secret Service has thrown an extraordinary guard around the Vice President. Mrs. Johnson was seen by reporters not too many minutes ago, and she was asked how the Vice President was, now the President of the United States, and she said, he's fine. We repeat what we've told you before, that Vice President Johnson was not shot. The other man shot was Governor Connally of Texas. And the governor, by the way, has talked with Mr. Huber, his principal assistant. He is in apparently fairly good condition. He has said that he saw the whole thing, and they got the president too, he told his assistants. The doctors have discovered that Governor Connally of Texas has been shot just under the shoulder blade in the back, and the seriousness of it has not yet been determined, but he's conscious. He's able to talk to his friends. And Mr. Huber said that the governor had asked him, he had asked the governor what he could do for him, and the governor had asked him, please just take care of Mrs. Connally for me. So apparently the governor of Texas is not injured as badly as it would appear that he had been at first. Incidentally, NBC News reports from Dallas that a car believed to be the assassin's getaway car has been seized in Fort Worth. And the suspect, the man still not identified, has been taken into custody. Also, a policeman also was shot and killed during the assassination. Incidentally, Fort Worth, as you know, is very close to Dallas, and a car could have got to Fort Worth with no trouble at all, provided the assassins had planned in advance how to get away from the motorcade in Dallas. Incidentally, a Negro woman rushed into the hospital where President Kennedy was taken with a wounded child. Now, whether the child had been injured in some other kind of situation or whether in the situation that occurred during the assassination of the president was not clear. The woman and the child were taken to the emergency quarters of the hospital. Incidentally, from Rome, the word is spreading very fast. England, we've heard from Havana, Europe, all are on the alert to news of the assassination of President Kennedy. From Rome, we have a report from Vatican City. Cardinal Francis Spellman of New York said tonight that he was shocked and grief-stricken to hear of President John Kennedy's death. These kind of statements, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be getting regularly and at frequent intervals for many hours to come. Incidentally, if the president was indeed alive, as most reports indicate he was, he lived about an hour after the sniper had cut him down in his limousine near downtown Dallas. The president was 46 years old, and of course, if it had been possible for him to have survived this shot, his vigor unquestionably would have pulled him through, but it was not. And incidentally, if you have any questions about the vice presidency, automatically the mantle of the presidency falls to the vice president on the death of a president. That means that he doesn't have to take any oath of office immediately. He is President of the United States. That's Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas, and as we reported to you, he was unhurt because he was automatically kept in another automobile so that there would not be the double close risk of the president and the vice president together in a situation of this kind, particularly in travel areas. And now let's see what they're doing on NBC TV News at this point. They have new reports on the president's assassination.
The practice she's developed the last couple of days took the initiative in going over to the fence, and she and the president walked all along the fence, shaking hands with both hands, and the crowd was really delirious with them. And this kind of reaction was something like the reaction that was encountered in the big crowds all the way through the town. Very friendly. I saw only one hostile sign all the way through the motorcade, which went about 10 miles. And then suddenly, in the middle of this bright sunshine, the friendly crowd, and nobody expecting anything, these three muffled shots were heard. And it couldn't have been a more startling, gruesome contrast to the very pleasant, sunny, friendly atmosphere that he'd received, despite all the warnings that things were going to be difficult for him here in Dallas.
Why was that, Bob? Because of Adlai Stevenson's recent visit?
Well, this had been the thing that made the police worry, and Dallas got such a bad name around the world after the attack on Stevenson that the authorities were determined that there would be no repetition of this. You remember the ambassador was, someone spat on him and someone hit him over the head with a poster. They mobilized a third of their entire city police force with extra paddy wagons around the corner and everything else, and put on a strong propaganda campaign in the newspapers and on the radio and TV stations to make sure that the name of Dallas was not dragged in the mud again by any unfavorable incident when the president came. And that is why it was such a contrast.
What is the situation in the room where you are at the hospital now?
Well, I'm in a little small waiting room where emergency patients wait to be taken into the operating rooms where they're treated. And there are a few policemen who are the only ones left in the long corridor leading to the room with double swinging doors, behind which we assume the president's body is being placed in the bronze coffin, which was taken in about half an hour ago, and from which we expect it to come out shortly.
Bob, we have a still photograph here in the studio
that has just moved, and it shows a man and a woman and what looks like two small children lying on the ground. I understand you saw these people.
Yes, well, they were the first people I went to. I must have got there shortly after or before that picture was taken, when I jumped out of the press bus, and they, in common with many other people, were screaming and lying down in the grass to escape from the shooting. The minute the shooting sound started, the air was filled with the screams of women and children. A sort of very feminine wailing filled the air, and everybody lay down on the sidewalks, on the grass, on the edge of the parkway. And I assume that the picture you're talking about is that, because nobody else I know was besides Kennedy and Governor Connolly.
We lost a part of that. You say, as far as you know, no one else.
As far as I know, no one else was hit other than President Kennedy and Governor Connolly.
Now, Bob, again, about the area or the building from which the shot apparently was fired. Could you describe that for us and tell us about how far away it was from the car and how they would have been able to see the car from that distance?
Yes, well, I'll describe the scene. There was, as you come out of the main street of downtown Dallas, which was packed with people, it leads into a parkway called the Triple Underpass. And that parkway, which is lined with trees and lawns, takes a bend. And behind some trees, in a sort of service road, is a brick building of about 8 stories, which is called the Texas School Book Depository.
I see. So
according to witnesses, 2 of them who I talked to and the police talked to, say they saw a man with a gun in the, one said the 2nd floor, another one said the 4th floor, a window of that building. Now, from either floor, Frank, he would be able to see over the low trees to about 100 yards away where the president's car was.
An unobstructed view, Bob?
I would think so. I was not able to go up to either of those windows, so I couldn't see for myself, but looking at it from the ground, it looked as though it would be. The president, therefore, must have had presented either a profile to the assailant, if he was, in fact, in those windows where the witnesses say, or his 3/4 back, because his car had actually passed the direct line from the window. You see, the way it went is the car would have approached the window head-on, then turned left and gone down a slight decline under the under the underpass. Just a moment, Frank.
Yes, Bob.
That seems to fit, Bill, with what he said. The word that we had here was the president was struck in the
Frank,
right.
Yes, Bob. The body has been carried out.
Go ahead. Say again, Bob.
The president's body has just been carried out of the hospital in the bronze casket, and it was accompanied by his military aide, Major General Clifton.
And
it has been placed in an ambulance. I understand it is being taken straight to the air base where he landed to be flown back to Washington.
I see, Bob.
The crowds have all been moved away from the door by the local police and the Secret Service. I can hear the motorcycle escort outside with the ambulance starting up. And the president's body with the police motorcycle escort is now pulling away from the hospital. It is about 1.5 hours since he was shot. The president has been dead for about an hour and 7 minutes. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who is now constitutionally the president, left immediately after the president's death was confirmed, and with a police escort went off to the airport, presumably to go straight to Washington to assume the constitutional responsibilities of the president.
Bob, returning to your earlier narrative, you had just taken us to the point where the president's car had turned, and I was about to ask.
Now, there were 3 cars behind him with Secret Service and several Texas congressmen, and then I was in the first press bus, the front of the first press bus, which came behind those. And just as we turned the corner, about 40 feet behind the president's car, I heard 3 shots.
Now, Bob, was the president seated or standing at that time?
The president was seated because there were very few people at that point. It was a thin crowd at that exact point. Most of the crowd had been concentrated a few hundred yards back. The president was seated, Mrs. Kennedy was seated, but when I heard shots, I saw people fall to the ground and was not looking for the moment at the president. The car immediately disappeared under the underpass and speeded up to go straight to the hospital. And I left the press box and went to this building from which the shots reportedly came.
Mm-hmm. What sort of a building is it, Bob?
Well, it is I told you the title. It's the Texas School Book Depository. It's a orangey brick building of about 8 floors, and it was showing an expanse to the street of maybe about 8 windows wide in the front.
Well, Bob, from the point where they think the man with the gun might have been seen to where the president was actually felled, would it have been possible for him to have been struck by a bullet in the right temple? That's his
I believe that if he was using a high-powered rifle with a telescopic sight, one policeman told me he understood it was a high-powered rifle. I don't know about the telescopic sight. I assume that from that distance it could be.
I see.
Could be.
About how fast was the president's motorcade going at the time of the
slowly.
fire?
It was about, by that time, having just gone around the corner, it was probably between 15 and 20 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. And Vice President Lyndon Johnson was how far behind?
I'm not sure, Frank, which car. There was a jumble of congressmen in the car immediately behind, and I'm not sure which car Vice President Johnson was in.
And then you say, of course, that the motorcade speeded up immediately and rushed toward the hospital.
Disappeared under the underpass, and I had jumped out by that time and was running with the police. They thought the assailant had fled over some railroad tracks, and they chased him through what they thought was the assailant, through several trains. Standing on the tracks, and I went with them, and therefore didn't see the president immediately as he went under the underpass.
Well, did they apprehend this person they were chasing?
No, they apprehended nobody at that time. They went back and started talking to witnesses on the scene.
I see.
Just a moment, Frank.
Yes, Bob.
Which car was
there is also this that could be added. We have...
Frank, I'm told that Vice President Johnson was in the car directly behind the president.
I see. Now, Bob, from the point where the assassination occurred to the hospital is about how far in time and distance, would you say?
Well, it's about a mile and a half. I was able to commandeer a private car.
Hold it, Bob. We have a little information here, please.
We are now going to the United Nations, where I'm told delegates from the member nations are expressing their condolences to Ambassador Adlai Stevenson. So we switch now to the United Nations.
I call now on the Secretary General.
Mr. President, as Secretary General of the United Nations,
Bob?
I would like to express
hang on.
profound sorrow at this most tragic event and to be associated in the condolences to Mrs. Kennedy to the members of the bereaved family, and to the government and people of the United States.
I request members of the General Assembly to rise and observe 1 minute of silence in tribute to the memory of President Kennedy, after which I shall adjourn this meeting in sign of mourning.
Ladies and gentlemen, silent mourning in the United Nations for the President of the United States. This is Morgan Beatty, NBC Radio, New York. We have bulletins from Dallas. Governor John Connally of Texas underwent an operation for a gunshot wound in the chest at 1:30 p.m. Central Time today. Connally's condition, as we have indicated to you before, is serious, but those close to him say that his doctor's report, the vital signs were good, meaning his vitality was strong and he could probably stand the operation. Doctors said Connally had a good pulse. His respiration is satisfactory. And now as to more vital facts, the statistics of death in Dallas, the assassination of President John Kennedy. The hospital report shows that the president lived about 30 minutes after the sniper cut him down as his limousine left downtown Dallas. Newsmen said the shot that hit him was fired at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. The hospital record now shows that the President of the United States died at approximately 1 p.m. Central Standard Time of a bullet wound clear through the head. Reaction, as you may know, is coming from throughout the world. The British cabinet, man by man, is receiving the reports of the President's death momentarily. They're following events very closely, especially the Prime Minister, who was Lord Hume. The reaction in Washington is just as you would expect it. Shocked, stunned, and unbelieving. And yet, it's true. We take you now for reaction in our capital to Robert McCormick, NBC News at the House of Representatives in Washington.
Never has the Congress of the United States been so stunned. The members of the Senate are walking around literally with glazed eyes. They scarcely speak to each other. They are in dazes, really. They seem to have no awareness, really, of what's going on. In the interval before the President's death was confirmed, they clustered around the ticker tapes in the lobby outside the Senate chamber. For every last word that came in, one or two of the secretaries moving around were already crying. But in the meantime, we do have some reaction, and to begin, here is Senate Republican leader Dirksen.
There are some things that are simply incredible and leave one absolutely speechless. This is one of them. I knew John Fitzgerald Kennedy as a representative, as a senator, and as a president for 14 years or more. And my last visit with him was on Tuesday morning this week. I went early to present him with a turkey from the Turkey Growers Association. He was so amiable, so affable, so agreeable, and he looked in the very pink of condition, notwithstanding a rather rugged tour in the state of Florida. The thing that stuck in my mind most, when suddenly he shouted to a lot of school children and to those managing this live turkey, "Don't take the turkey away until the children have had a chance to come up and see it." We visited about many things: politics, bills pending in Congress, the future, 1964, and everything that one can encompass within a half-hour visit. And suddenly comes this mortal blow that strikes him cold in death. I say it's an incredible thing. And my heart goes out to the family. And I'm a little bewildered by this turn of events, as I know the nation and the whole wide world will be. So first, my sincere sympathy to the entire Kennedy family. And in the language of the chaplain, as we had a prayer in the hope that transfusion might infuse recovery, that the nation still stands and the nation will live.
And ladies and gentlemen, the tribute of Senator Dirksen of Illinois from Washington. And now we have urgent bulletins from Dallas again. We reported to you not too long ago that the report that a policeman had been shot, now we have detail to a certain extent. A Secret Service agent and a Dallas policeman were shot and killed today some distance from the area where President Kennedy was assassinated. We have no more information on that, but from the Secret Service, Lieutenant Eric Kaminsky reports the assassin weapon appears to have been a high-powered Army or Japanese rifle of about .25 caliber. The rifle had a scope on it, the same kind of rifle, apparently, that Medgar Evers, the Negro leader, was shot with in Mississippi. The entire building, as we've noticed before, or told you before, this was a warehouse near the underpass where the president was traveling. But the entire building, this warehouse where the sniper was located, was evacuated sometime before the president passed by. People were working in the building, however, at the time of the shooting. Dallas Police Inspector J.H. Sawyer says police found the remains of fried chicken and paper on the 5th floor of that building. Apparently, the person who had been there quite a while. And after the fatal shots were fired, the stricken President's Secret Service, of course, the driver, raced away immediate to the hospital. And we have further reports at this time from Dallas to piece out this story as fast as we possibly can. One of the prime reporters on station WFAA, the NBC affiliate in Dallas, is standing by. Pierce Alman, WFAA Dallas, will you please come in?
About 12:15 today, I and a couple of other people from the station decided to walk about 4 blocks north from our studios to greet the President of the United States as he came through Dallas on a motorcade. He had left Dallas Love Field. He had a warm reception there. He had caused some consternation to the Secret Service agents around him by leaving the yellow marked guide lanes as he got off his jet and began greeting people who were standing alongside the wire fence at Dallas Love Field. Without incident, he got into his convertible, open top, and flanked by Secret Service men, began his ride through downtown Dallas. The reception was warm, it was enthusiastic, and as he came down Main Street on the way to the Stemmons Avenue Trade Mart, where he was to deliver an address sponsored by the Dallas Citizens Council, he turned the corner just before going under a triple underpass. I was standing at the corner of Elm Streets and Houston Streets here in Dallas, Texas, and as he turned, I couldn't help think to myself how vigorous, how healthy he looked. He was tanned. He seemed to be feeling good. He was waving to the crowd. I began applauding like the rest, and the man to my right and the woman to my left. She commented on Jackie's lovely dress, and suddenly we heard a reverberating explosion. My first thought was not to look at the president. I guess the thought that anybody would take a shot at the President of the United States didn't even go through my mind at the time. I rather looked around as if to say, well, someone has fireworks and it's in pretty poor taste at this moment. The President ducked, at least that's what it looked like to me. I thought this was a natural reaction. I didn't realize at the time that he had been shot and was slumping. There were 3 shots fired. They were spaced. They didn't seem to come from any automatic weapon of any kind. Rather careful and deliberate aim. A Secret Service man was killed. No one seemed galvanized into instant action. Everyone was rather stunned. And suddenly, the Lincoln convertible sped away at top speed, and guns appeared on everyone around. The police came around, flinging us to the ground, saying, hit the dirt, and they began not returning fire because of the crowd, but rather looking for someone at which to shoot. I ran, along with a few other people, over to the top of a knoll, which was just north of the site. It was about 20 feet. Everyone seemed to be running in that direction. Very foolish people, now that we look back on it. We couldn't see anything, though. There's a large building, about 7 or 8 stories, on the corner of Elm and Houston Streets. It's a Texas school book depository. It prides itself on being the largest in the state. It has several floors that are not used too often that stack dusty books. And we wondered to ourselves at the time how it was possible to cover all the open windows in this building as well as all the open space around. How the Secret Service, how the FBI men, how the county sheriff's officers, and how the Dallas police officers could do this. Well, evidently they could not successfully. We went into the Texas School Book Depository building, and immediately it was cordoned off by men with high-powered rifles and shotguns. They began searching the building, and first reports said they found direct evidence that the shots were fired from there. But at last reports, and this was just a few minutes ago, they are not certain which floor, if they were fired from this particular building. Supposedly it was Japanese ammunition. Anyway, the president, as he left the scene, was stretched out on the turtleback of this car, and he was holding Jackie, or I guess Jackie was holding him. It took him about 5 minutes to get to Parkland Hospital, and I didn't learn that he was dead until I got back here to the station. The reaction, I think, among the crowds who are now standing around streets in downtown Dallas, tuned into their radios, they're just standing around. Nobody's really saying much, except it's just unbelievable. And why? And I guess we'll never know the answer to that.
I guess maybe we will, too. And if we don't know it, unfortunately, our, shall we use the word colleagues from Moscow are already saying why the President of the United States was shot before they have even the slightest idea. From Moscow, the Soviet news agency TASS reports that the President of the United States was shot in Dallas, Texas, and died later, and it adds an attempt was made on his life by persons believed to be among extreme right-wing elements. As usual, the Moscow reporters go off half-cocked and they make everything fit their social philosophy. They may turn out to be right, but that will be merely an accident because, as we have heard from Pierce Alman, WFAA in Dallas, at the moment nobody knows exactly how or why. Reaction is coming in from around the world continually. Reaction from the Pope. He has taken note of the death of the President of the United States with sadness. And from Cardinal Spellman of New York, and here in New York City, where President Kennedy frequently visits, we have Joseph Michaels. He's at City Hall in New York.
Morgan, I'm near Trinity Church. Trinity Church, the famous Trinity Church at the head of Wall Street. This was a huge blow to everyone. The stock exchange closed at 2:09, closed by the Board of Governors when the floor was in a chaotic condition. Perhaps you can hear the bells behind me now. Trinity Church's bells are ringing again. Our reaction is not from presidents or heads of church, but from his fellow citizens, among them first a young Negro.
Losing Kennedy is like losing a father, because he's been like a father to everyone in this nation. It hurts everyone in this nation. We're going to miss him very much. I don't know why they did it. Kennedy didn't do nothing to nobody. On the contrary, he tried to help everybody in his home. For everybody, he tried to help as much as he can. I don't know why and how they could do anything like this to him.
Sir, what will it do to business?
Well, I don't think it'll affect business at all, sir. I believe that we had a great president who is doing a lot for business, and I believe that he set a trend that Americans will recognize and follow, and I think, if anything, it will help us become more dedicated to helping our businesses and helping our nation.
What will it do to the causes that he believed in?
Well, I believe the causes that President Kennedy believed in are the causes that all Americans believe in. Whether or not someone said they were a Kennedy man prior to this, I'm sure that we all join today in grieving for him and in recognizing that he had at his heart the hearts of all Americans, and that he was striving to accomplish for this nation what we all would want to.
All over the city, wherever there's a radio turned on, as of course we have had to keep our radio turned on to keep abreast of what is happening. With me now are people gathered around any such means of information. The feeling is mostly shock. People find it hard to put into words how they feel. They wander around looking stunned. They pick up a newspaper from the stand and look at it almost unseeingly, and then ask each other if it's true. And then people ask each other what's going to happen next. And like all of us, except for the fact that we have faith in our country, nobody has any of those answers.
Soon after President Kennedy was assassinated today in Dallas, a white man in his mid-20s was arrested in the Riverside section of Fort Worth. Apparently, he is connected, by the police at least, with the shooting of a Dallas policeman. This is quite a mystery. A Secret Service man and a policeman, a Dallas policeman and a Washington Secret Service man, were shot some distance from where the assassination occurred of President Kennedy. We have not yet had word as to exactly what connection the shooting possibly in Fort Worth had. But this man who was arrested in Fort Worth was a man with black curly hair. He wore a red shirt. He said he was not connected with the assassination of the president. He told that to reporters, but he was urged on by the police. His hands were handcuffed, and he was taken to the Fort Worth City Jail. And now, Irving, a few more facts and detail from Dallas, if we may, at this point. President Kennedy's body was removed from Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas at 2:05 p.m. Central Standard Time. It was taken away in a long, green-colored ambulance with off-white curtains tightly drawn. Mrs. Kennedy rode in the passenger seat in the ambulance. That's the type of vehicle with two seats for passengers. She and the president's body were escorted from the emergency entrance of Parkland by two motorcycle officers. Mrs. Kennedy walked out of the back door of the emergency entrance as the body was taken out. She walked slowly. She looked around her in a dazed manner, and she appeared to be in a state of shock. Another announcement, White House Secretary Malcolm Kilduff said the president's body would be flown to Washington this afternoon, almost immediately. The Dallas Sheriff's Department says a rifle has been found in a staircase on the 5th floor of that warehouse building near the scene of the assassination. And now we have confirmation of exactly the kind of weapon. It was a 7.65 Mauser rifle. German-made Army rifle, had a telescopic sight with one shell left in the chamber. 3 spent shells were found nearby. As you've noted before, we've had reports that there were either 2 or 3 shots. The police credit 3 shots with being fired, and incidentally, the 3rd shot apparently struck Governor Connally of Texas because he was wounded in 2 places. One place is, of course, of no importance, but the wound in the back under the shoulder blade is the one for which Governor Connally of Texas is now being operated on. His condition is still serious, although his physicians feel that the vital points, his pulse, his reaction generally mean that he may well pull through. And now we have another bulletin from Dallas. White House authorities report that the body of President Kennedy will arrive in Washington at 5:30 p.m. That would apparently mean at 5:30 p.m. Standard Time. It's now something after 2:30 p.m. Dallas time. I assume we can guess that the body will be flown back to Washington immediately, so that the episode in Dallas will be completed within a very brief period of time. We have no further police reports or Secret Service reports showing exactly what connection there is in the fatal shooting of a Dallas policeman and a Secret Service man, apparently in the area of Fort Worth, Texas. One white man has been arrested in connection with that. Apparently, the assassin of the President of the United States was a white man in his 30s. At least such a man was seen near the place where the President was shot in Dallas about 12:30 p.m. this afternoon. Incidentally, if we may revive the scene for the moment, to give you the exact placing in the presidential car of those who were closest to the chief executive when he was fatally shot. President Kennedy and Governor Connally of Texas and their wives had been riding together in the president's familiar dark blue bubble-top convertible. They were leaving downtown Dallas at the time the assassination occurred near a triple culvert, and the shot that was fired at the president was fired from apparently the 5th floor of a warehouse by a 7.65 Mauser, that is a German Army rifle. Apparently 3 shots were fired. One struck the President of the United States in the right temple and went cleanly through his head. The White House physician has said it was a simple case of a bullet going clear through a man's head. Incidentally, in the transparent plastic roof of the presidential car when the shooting occurred, that is, the plastic roof of the car had been removed from the motorcade so that the president was riding in an open car at the time. Secret Service agents riding with the president and in a second convertible, following closely behind, immediately drew pistols and automatic weapons. But there was no possibility of their firing at anybody with any effect without causing some kind of an accident. We have a bulletin from New York now. The League of New York Theaters announces that all Broadway theaters will be closed tonight. Willard Keith, spokesman for the League, says all League members' shows on the road also will be closed tonight in the beginning of the period of mourning for the death of the President of the United States. NBC News has learned that the military officers charged with arranging for state funerals are at the White House at this moment, discussing possible funeral plans. Mr. Kennedy is the first president to die in office under the new Defense Department setup. So protocol will have to be written as it is. That is, the idea of the military handling a funeral of the President of the United States is an entirely new one, and they will have to set precedents at this time. For those of you who may not know about it, one of the important facts of life in Washington is that the military is in charge of the District of Columbia in many ways. The Capitol building and so on is the only building there that's excluded from their direct charge, and they are indirectly in charge of that. So that it is entirely fitting, as was done a few years ago, that the Defense Department should handle affairs such as the one that we have regretfully and sadly before us, a funeral of another President of the United States, and this one in the terrible tradition of Lincoln and McKinley. The Army will have charge as usual. There are caissons and ceremonial horses at Fort Myer, Virginia, of course, along with units of troops ready for use in such capacities, so that Fort Myer will take charge of the funeral arrangements for President John Kennedy of the United States. And now more reaction from the Capitol. We switch now to NBC's Robert McCormick at the Capitol for reaction in the House of Representatives.
Actually, this is reaction from the Senate. One of the first members of Congress to get the bad news was one of President Kennedy's oldest friends, Senate Democratic leader Mansfield. He turned pale when he heard the news, and then he and Dirksen together left the chamber to call the White House. Here is what Senator Mansfield had to tell us later.
The passing of John Fitzgerald Kennedy is not only a tragedy for the nation which he so ably represented, but is, I think, also a mark upon the respectability and the responsibility of some of our citizens. This good, this decent, this kindly man, this harassed man who had so much on his shoulders and received from some people so little in the way of support in return, this man is now gone to his reward. And I will miss him as a personal friend. The nation will miss him as a great president. And the world will miss him as a great leader. One of the fondest memories I can recall is the cooperation and the support which the distinguished senator from Illinois, Mr. Dirksen, the minority leader of the Senate, gave to the President of the United States, a Democrat, time and time again when the interests of the nation were at stake. And I know how grateful he was to you for the many contributions you made, and I'm just as grateful, and the nation is too. Words are useless to express one's true feelings at a moment like this.
Mike, a person's perplexity is just too great in a tragic moment like this.
That last voice was Senate Republican leader Dirksen. Capitol officials have told us that they are making tentative arrangements for the body of the late President Kennedy to lie in state in the rotunda of the Capitol for the stipulated period of mourning, so he can be viewed by the people of the country. The city of Washington, by the way, is packed with people in the streets. and they are concerned about rumors that something has happened to Vice President Johnson. The word we get here from Senate Democratic Leader Mansfield and others is that the Vice President Johnson, perhaps now President, we've not had word whether he's sworn in, is quite all right. Ironically, the chair of the Senate was occupied by the President's brother when the President was shot. Senator Edward Kennedy had been presiding over a rather dull session. A Richard Riedel, who mans one of the doors to the Senate lobby, brought the news into the Senate of what had happened and had the terrible job of telling Senator Kennedy that his brother had been shot. And here is Mr. Riedel's story.
Richard Riedel, to already given my name. Press liaison, which means contact between the Washington correspondents, members of the press gallery, radio, television correspondents, White House news photographers, and the periodical press, with the senators on the floor, arranging appointments, asking them questions. In the 45 years I have been on the staff of the Senate, since September 27, 1918, when I was a 9-year-old boy and a page for 4 years, this is one of the hardest blows and one of the most moving, tragic experiences that I have ever known to sweep over the Senate. I may, if there's time later, mention when President Roosevelt died and President Truman, Vice President, then was presiding when the word of his death came. Well, the routine, the tickers in the lobby, AP and UP tickers, are read by senators and staff members for routine information. Phyllis Rock of the staff of Senator Morse of Oregon was in the lobby by herself reading the ticker. She turned to one of my assistants, Tom Pelican, who is with Senator Long of Missouri in his office part of the time, and said the president has been shot. Tom rushed out to tell me. I immediately went into the Senate chamber in front of the desk of Majority Leader Senator Mike Mansfield, raised my voice so that he and the senators, the surrounding desks, could hear, and said, "Senators, the president has been shot." It, of course, was like a shockwave, a jolt. I crossed the aisle to the Republican side, where Senator Dirksen was seated, and in the same manner told Senator Dirksen and the Republican senators who were at adjacent desks, with, of course, the same shock reaction and stunned expression on their faces. I then happened to recall that a few moments before, the president's brother, Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts, was presiding over the Senate. I turned and he was still occupying the chair. I knew that someone would have to inform him. I thought I might as well. It was a very difficult job because of the family relationship as well as the friendship of the senators to the president. I rushed up to the chair and said, Senator Kennedy, your brother, the president, has been shot." He gave a jerk to his body. His body tensed, but he was absolutely calm. And as I recall, Senator Kennedy, then presiding over the Senate, when he heard this awful news, said no. And that was all. In an orderly manner, he gathered up the papers on his desk that his routine office work that he brings when he presides over the Senate, so that he can conserve the time, the long hours presiding over the Senate by working at his office work. I walked off the rostrum with him with my arm around Senator Kennedy, patting his shoulders, and said, "Senator, if there's anything any of us can do, let us know." My own suggestion would be that you contact the Air Force and have them rush you out to Texas to your brother's side in a jet, in a military jet.
Well, of course, that turns out now to be unnecessary because the president's body is being flown back to Washington and it's expected to arrive there at 5:30 p.m. And in that connection, we can report that President Johnson is expected to take the oath of office as President of the United States aboard an airliner before flying immediately back to the nation's capital. The entire Kennedy party, of course, is flying back immediately to Washington. And from Dallas, the mystery concerning exactly how and why this assassination occurred seems to increase rather than decrease with the passing of time and the gaining of more information. The Dallas Police Department has arrested a 24-year-old man, Lee H. Oswald, in connection with the slaying of a Dallas policeman shortly after President Kennedy was assassinated. The man is also being interrogated to see if he had any connection with the slaying of the president. Oswald was pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas. He brandished a pistol. Officers took it away from him after a scuffle. Police officer M.N. McDonald, who was cut across the face in the scuffle, quoted Oswald as saying after he was subdued, "Well, it's all over now." That may or may not mean anything in connection with the assassination of the president. A large crowd was congregated around the theater and witnessed the arrest. Police had to hold the crowds back because many apparently connected the arrested man with the slaying of the president and wanted to get at the man. The officer who was slain earlier was J.D. Tippit. He'd been killed by a man answering the description of Oswald in the neighborhood a short time before. Tippit had been slain with a pistol. As you know, the assassination of the president was accomplished by a German Mauser 7.65 rifle. Robert Kennedy has left his Virginia estate, his Virginia home, for the airport to fly to Texas. But whether or not he was intercepted at the airport and told to remain in Washington, we do not know. And we also repeat to you that the identity of the assassin of President Kennedy, or assassins in case there were more than one, is not immediately known. We do know that he was shot from the 5th floor of a warehouse opposite the highway where the tragic event took place. Dr. Malcolm Perry, the attending surgeon at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, said when he arrived at the emergency room, "I noticed the president was in critical condition with the wound of the neck and head." When asked if possibly the wounds could have been made by 2 bullets, he said he did not know. He said immediate resumptive measures were taken, and Dr. Kemp Clark, chief of neurosurgery, was called along with several other members of the staff. Dr. Perry said they arrived immediately, but at this point the president's condition was critical and moribund, meaning that he was dying. A tracheotomy was performed to assist the president's breathing. The doctors said an oxygen machine was used, and an electrocardiograph machine was attached to record any heartbeat. When asked to specify, Dr. Perry said the entrance wound was in the front of the head. Before, we'd been told it was from temple to temple. Well, of course, that could be in front of the head. Former President Dwight Eisenhower today called the assassination of President Kennedy a despicable act. The former president, in a statement issued from his suite at a hotel in New York, said this: "I share the sense of shock and dismay that all Americans feel at the despicable act that resulted in the death of our nation's president. Mrs. Eisenhower and I also join with all other citizens in expressing our personal grief and prayerful concern to Mrs. Kennedy and all other members of the family." Take note of that one statement about our nation's president. Oftentimes people confuse the person of the man in the White House with the office of the presidency. No doubt the assassins did that. They do not recognize, they could not, the terrible harm they're doing to 180 million people and the chief office of those people, not to a mere man named John F. Kennedy. Comment from Chief Justice Earl Warren. He says, "I was stunned and shocked to hear of the president's death." It's interesting to note that Chief Justice Warren had sworn President Kennedy in as the chief executive of our nation. And now more details on Moscow, the way the news has been broken to the people of Russia. Moscow Radio broke into its Home Services news bulletin to tell Soviet listeners that President Kennedy had been shot. This was before the news of the president's death had reached Moscow through official channels. The Home Service in Moscow is a service beamed directly to all newspaper offices in the Russian republics, and it is relayed from there to various radio stations throughout Soviet Russia. From State Line, Nevada, actor Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law, when told of the assassination, cried, "Oh, my God." He's married to the sister of President Kennedy. Incidentally, an employee of the Kennedy family notified Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of the president, and Mrs. Kennedy that their son had been shot. And they said not a word when they were told. And now let's see if we can get deeper into this great mystery that seems to surround a multiplicity of deaths and shootings surrounding this assassination. We've still not found out whether the arrest of a young man in Dallas in a theater with a pistol and the shooting of a policeman and a Secret Service man was connected with the assassination of the president. Ladies and gentlemen, a bulletin from Dallas. Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States at about 1:38 p.m. Central Standard Time today. That was about 6 minutes ago. The oath was administered by United States District Judge Sarah T. Hughes. For the first time in the history of the United States, a woman official has sworn in a President of the United States. So now, apparently, Mr. Johnson will take another plane and fly immediately to the capital of the United States, where President Kennedy's body will be taken, and the planes are expected to arrive in Washington about 5:30 p.m. The Pentagon officials in charge, the military officials of the Pentagon, have already taken charge of funeral arrangements for President Kennedy. There will be a lying in state in the rotunda of the Capitol, as there has been in the case of all presidents and in the case of many prominent Americans, including the late Senator Robert Taft. The president will lie in state very near the place where Abraham Lincoln lay, where President McKinley, another victim of an assassin, lay after his assassination, and President MacArthur, who died before McKinley. President Kennedy becomes the fourth president of the United States who was assassinated in office. Another one was shot and wounded, President Teddy Roosevelt. Let's get a report from Nancy Dickerson at Andrews Air Force Base near Washington.
The body of President Kennedy is due to arrive here at Andrews Air Force Base at 5:25 this evening. The route the body will follow once it does arrive here back in Washington has not yet been announced. It's being decided now. The President's sister, Mrs. Eunice Shriver, has already taken off for Otis Air Force Base. She was accompanied by her brother, Senator Teddy Kennedy. Both were red-eyed. They looked obviously as if they had been crying. It is presumed that they went up to Otis Air Force Base to pick up Mrs. Rose Kennedy and bring her back here. The President's plane, or one of the President's planes, entitled The United States of America, stands at the ready out on the runway, seeming to rev up in case it's needed. There's a sense of shock and deep disbelief here as the flags at the Air Force Base have been lowered. This is Nancy Dickerson of NBC News at the Andrews Air Force Base.
And now, a most impressive statement about the death of the President, a very brief one, from a man revered by all Americans, former President Herbert Hoover, who only recently passed through the illness of his lifetime and whose life was despaired of for some time. This is the voice of the true conservative in the United States of America. I am shocked and grieved to learn of President Kennedy's assassination. He loved America, and he has given his life for his country. I join our bereaved nation in heartfelt sympathy to Mrs. Kennedy and their 2 children. The voice of the true conservative, who's always American and loyal to the office of the presidency of the United States. So few of us understand the full meaning of that office, entirely apart from the man in it. And now, on hand in the Senate of the United States is a man who has covered the activities of 3 presidents. Ray Shearer, at the Senate. Ray, will you come in?
One by one, Morgan, the leading figures of the Senate and the House have been appearing in the Senate gallery, ashen-faced, white, stunned, making statements. Senator Goldwater said, "It is a both shocking and dreadful thing that a thing like this could happen in a free country. The President's death is a profound loss to the nation and the free world. He and I were personal friends. It is also a great loss to me. Mrs. Goldwater and I offer our heartfelt sympathies to Mrs. Kennedy and the President's family." The Senator then announced that he has canceled his scheduled appearance tomorrow night in Grand Rapids. Charles Hellick, the House Minority Leader, has just been here. He said the assassination of President Kennedy is an unspeakable crime against all the people of this country. The world should know, Halleck said, that in this hour of national tragedy, Americans stand together as one, shocked and grieved at this unbelievable news. Political differences had no part in the personal affection I felt for President Kennedy, an affection I have reason to believe the President felt for me. Here now, Senator Russell of Georgia. The news of this dastardly crime, he said, has stunned and shocked the American people and the friends of freedom throughout the world. The assassin's bullet has stricken a brilliant and dedicated statesman at the very height of his powers. My personal relations with the President, both as a fellow member of Congress and during his presidency, have always been most cordial, and I have a deep sense of personal loss. The heart of the world goes out to the members of his family in this tragic hour. Senator Byrd was here about 15 minutes ago. He said, "I am deeply shocked. The assassination of President Kennedy is a disaster to the nation and to the free world. I cannot find words to express my personal distress." Hubert Humphrey said, "America has lost a great president. The world has lost a great leader. I have lost a good friend. What an incredible tragedy. Our prayers go out to President Johnson. His task is great. His responsibility is unbelievably heavy. He will need the cooperation, faith, and help of every American. He has mine." That from Hubert Humphrey, possibly the President's closest associate in Congress. Senator Wayne Morse said, "In this dark and tragic hour, a great president has fallen. The immorality of the assassination is beyond understanding. All the world has lost a great leader and a wonderful human being. Let us pray for his loved ones." Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, he said, "This Black Friday will be long remembered by the people of our nation. We have lost a great man, a man of compassion, a man of strength. The loss of his leadership will be long felt by our nation and the free world." This from Senator Edmund Muskie, Democrat of Maine. "It is difficult to adjust to the shock of the news. It is impossible to comprehend the motives of one who would do this to his country. We have lost a great leader. I have lost a good friend. If I were to suggest what President Kennedy would say if he were here, it would be, this is a time to pray for our country. We must be restrained in our reactions. We must stand together, and I repeat, pray for our country." Now from Senator John Tower of Texas. "In company with all loyal Americans, I am shocked beyond words at this terrible tragedy that has been visited upon our land. My heart goes out to the President's family and to all our beloved land in this time of national shame. Leaders of both political parties have joined to welcome him to our state as our national leader, as the President of all people. There are no words to express my shock and dismay. My prayers are also with the family of our governor, that is, Governor Connolly of Texas, that he might soon recover from this cowardly attack and lead our state as he has ably done. Our republic has survived these crises before," says John Tower, "in other places and in other times. The knowledge that it would also survive this crisis, however, does not lessen our remorse that such a blow should be struck to our nation." We ask Speaker McCormick to come and make a statement. He is too stunned to appear. Here now, Bryson Rash, who has just come through Washington.
I came through the center of town from perhaps the busiest corner, 14th and F Street, to the Capitol Hill, to the Senate side of the Capitol, and it seemed to me as I came down that traffic was a little bit heavier than usual. Perhaps some government workers had left earlier, had been given a bit of time off so that they could leave their offices and get to their homes. There were some women standing with tears in their eyes, at bus stops, waiting for transportation, or as they hail taxi cabs. There's a great silence in Washington. There's little or no traffic noise, even seems to be more subdued. There was concern over the rumors that Vice President Lyndon Johnson had been stricken also, but these rumors have now, of course, been cleared up. But there was a good deal of talk among people as they stood at bus stops and other gathering places waiting to leave the city and get back to their homes. And one of the phenomena that occurred here in Washington immediately after the news was learned, all the telephone lines were suddenly overwhelmed. There was considerable wait for a dial tone to get any place to talk with anybody in Washington, D.C. At the time when the news actually broke in Washington, I happened to be in the press club, and there was an immediate rush and gathering around radio and television sets in a stunned disbelief. And then when the news finally came to these men, most of them reporters, they left for their offices, for their beats, for the other areas around Washington, D.C., where the news was developing and developing very, very rapidly. Ray?
Bryson, just one more. This from Senator Stuart Symington, the President's fellow Democrat. I think this one is particularly poignant. He says, once again, the former naval lieutenant, now President John F. Kennedy, has offered his life for his country. This time he lost. All free people, in turn, have lost a gallant and dedicated leader. It was impossible to know him well without having deep respect for him and devotion to him. To Mrs. Kennedy and the family, my wife and I send deepest sympathy. Now back to you, Morgan.
Well, if you'll stand by a moment, Ray, I'd like to bring up the historical facts in this situation, which seem to be our most important reporting duty at this time. So for those who have heard the information before, please bear with us, because we now have detail. Lyndon Baines Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States aboard the presidential airplane. Incidentally, it was Air Force One, and it immediately took off for Washington. Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy were with him. They were in the forward compartment of the airplane, and as you've already heard from NBC's Nancy Dickerson, that's Andrews Air Force Base. The party is expected in Washington at 5:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Vice President, now the President of the United States, becomes the 36th President. But, of course, there will always be those who will debate this point. It'll be interesting to know what the history books show. Actually, I think President Kennedy was listed as the 36th. There's a very definite reason for this. One president served twice, but not consecutively. And for those of you who don't know your history too well, and I'm sure there's only one or two of you, that man was President Cleveland. So the question of whether the 36th or the 37th president is rather interesting. And now for more details on this rather large and growing mystery surrounding the assassination. The last time we were in Dallas, we told you how a Secret Service man and a Dallas policeman were shot and killed in an area some distance from the scene of the assassination of the president on the way from downtown Dallas to the outskirts of the city, to the airport. And we told you that a man has been arrested by the name of Oswald in connection with the slaying of the policeman. That the shooting occurred in the 5th floor of a warehouse directly opposite the overpass where President Kennedy was passing at the moment of the assassination. Incidentally, to refresh in the minds the scene, we have an eyewitness account from Charles Bream, 38 years old, of Dallas, who was standing in the big crowd at the curbside about 15 feet from the president's car. This is a witness who was closer to the scene than any other. And here's what Charles Bream says. We are quoting him. The president was waving, and the first shot hit him, and then that awful look crossed his face. There were at least 3 bursts of gunfire. Now, that has been confirmed by the police. And the president slumped over on the seat, and Mrs. Kennedy screamed and said, "Oh, no, oh, no." And Governor Connolly, he was also shot, fell face forward on the floor. And the police charged up a grassy knoll into a nearby park. Secret Service men unlimbered automatic rifles and drew pistols, but it was too late. There was no point in firing. And now, let's pick up the story from there. We go again for a conversation to WFAA's Tom Perryman in Dallas, Texas. Will you come in, Tom?
Morgan, the story here is that the suspect arrested in connection with the shooting death of a policeman might be the man who assassinated President John F. Kennedy in Dallas this afternoon. He is being interrogated this time by Dallas police, but the late report indicates this might be the man. Crying, Federal District Judge Sarah T. Hughes swore in as President Lyndon B. Johnson at Love Field this afternoon. The body of President Kennedy, along with President Johnson and Mrs. Kennedy, flew in Air Force One, the presidential jet, to Washington. The casket was rushed to Parkland Hospital shortly after the late chief executive arrived with 2 body wounds suffered at the hands of an assassin. Governor Connolly is reported not out of the woods and has undergone surgery at the hospital. The suspect, when arrested, said, "Well, it's all over now." That's the suspect arrested by Dallas police, 24-year-old. His name is Lee Oswald. He was pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. He brandished a pistol, which officers took away from him after a scuffle. And a policeman who was cut on the face in the scuffle quoted Oswald as saying, "Well, it's all over now."
Tom.
That's the story.
Well, Tom, can you tell us this? Is there any way we can connect up Oswald with the scene at the overpass? In other words, what we have here is a picture before us of a man being arrested, saying it's all over now. He screamed, and apparently he shot another man, a policeman, and we have a report. We don't know that it's absolutely true that a Secret Service man was also shot. Now, do we have anything to trace this man from the scene of the assassination to where he was arrested, or is this simply police guess, or do we are just not getting enough information on the point? Too quick or something? Can you tell us?
Morgan, we do have information that a Secret Service man was shot along with a policeman. However, in the confusion, it's hard to confirm exactly what has happened here. The man that was arrested in connection with the shooting of the president and the shooting of a policeman fatally also in Dallas is undergoing interrogation. He was located at an area near the end of the motorcade and would not have been far from Oak Cliff, the area where he was arrested at a theater, Morgan. That's the story.
Oh, in other words, what we can assume without knowing up to this point is that the man who did the shooting got out of that building some way and got to this theater where he was arrested, if he should happen to be the man.
Right.
I see. In other words, he got clean away from that area. He'd probably planned it well in advance. Now, Tom, if you'll stay on a moment, maybe you'll have more news for us.
Right.
We have another report on the arrival of the body of the president. He's expected to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base at 6:05 p.m. That would put the president's body on a different plane than that carrying President Johnson, who has taken the oath of office, and Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy. The 3 of them are in the forward compartment of the plane Air Force One, as we understand. So apparently 2 planes are being used, and the President Johnson and Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Kennedy will arrive in Washington ahead of the president's body. And as we have been told, the Pentagon, the military officials of the United States, have taken charge of funeral plans and mourning period for the president in the District of Columbia, and it has already been determined that the body will lie in state in the rotunda of the Capitol, where so many prominent Americans have laid in the past. Americans generally might be interested to know that the Voice of America, that's the government's official voice that does not broadcast in the United States but broadcasts around the world, the Voice of America has interrupted all of its programs on news of the president's death. The announcers of the Voice made impromptu commentaries in 36 languages to reassure listeners of the continuity of the government of the United States, despite Mr. Kennedy's death. Our government will continue to explain to people overseas just what mechanism is set in motion when a president is dead. In many nations, there is not a continuity of government, but in the United States, there is a continuity of government, and it might be interesting for some Americans who may not know to realize that this is the oldest nation in the world that has established a continuity of government. Of course, the British government is much older, but they do not have the means of continuity that we have. We have automatic continuity, and what happens is this. Under the law of succession to the presidency, incidentally, that law was recently amended. The vice president automatically assumes the nation's top office, as did Mr. Johnson in Dallas, and he serves out the remainder of the president's term. When he takes the oath is not a matter of importance at the moment. He automatically becomes president on the death of a president. In the event the vice president should leave office, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, at this time, Mr. McCormick of Massachusetts, takes over and also serves out the rest of the term. If there's no House Speaker, or if he fails to qualify for the presidency, you have to be a natural-born American to be president of this country. The president pro tem of the Senate assumes the office of president. Then, in the line of succession, Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense, the Attorney General, Postmaster General, Secretary of Interior, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, and Secretary of Labor. This all detailed merely to assure all persons everywhere inside and outside of our borders there is absolute continuity of government in the United States regardless of what may happen to a president. Incidentally, the Voice of America is using all of its 10 million watts in 36 languages to news and reaction to the death of the President of the United States and his playing solemn and secular music, oftentimes hymns. Tom Perriman of Dallas, are you still on?
Him and said, "My God, he's shot." And
we're still here.
There was an
Morgan, we didn't hear your question.
I just wanted to know if you were still on. Are you interviewing an eyewitness there?
We are not at this time. We have some mobile units that are in the process of doing that, we hope.
Do you have any further information on the arrest or on any other phase of the departures?
Soon after the president was assassinated in Dallas this afternoon, a white man in his mid-20s was arrested in the Riverside section of Fort Worth in the shooting of a Dallas policeman. The man, who has black curly hair and wore a red shirt, denied that he was connected with the assassination of the chief executive. But his hands were handcuffed and he was taken to the Fort Worth City Jail. As you know, one man in Dallas was arrested at a theater after allegedly shooting a policeman, and was arrested in connection with the assassination of the president. There was thought to be a connection between the shooting of the policeman and the shooting of the president.
Now
that's the latest we have on it, Morgan. Another arrest, however, it's not known if there is a connection with the assassination.
Oh, now this means two white men are in custody.
Right. This one man was arrested in Fort Worth in connection with the shooting of a Dallas policeman.
I just wanted to make it clear to the listeners we have reported the arrest in Fort Worth previously, but we have not indicated clearly that Oswald, the man arrested in the theater, and the man arrested in Fort Worth are two separate men, and there is a possibility then that both of them have been arrested in connection with the assassination.
That's right.
Now, since the police found signs of fried chicken and 3 empty shells on that 5th floor, and they found a foreign-made rifle, a Mauser 7.65, and they have noted indications that the man on the 5th floor had been in that building. It was empty except for workmen, as I understand it. Then we have here the developing situation that there must have been a long-planned operation here that was intended to strike the president at exactly this point. In other words, this was no sudden, shall we say, assassination without premeditation.
That's right, Morgan. What it appears here, the motorcade, which had just passed through the downtown crowd, standing 10 and 12 feet deep along each curb, broke apart in pandemonium as Secret Service agents rushed Kennedy and Connally to the hospital where he was shot. Now, Kennedy was shot at a spot where there were very few spectators, after driving almost within handshaking distance of many thousands of people. This area, ironically, there were very few people, but evidently a good eye shot from a building where the sniper was.
Good. All right, Tom, then, is there any more information about Governor Connally? The last we heard, of course, is that he's still in serious condition. They are operating on him. He's shot between the shoulder blades or just under the shoulder blades in the back. Apparently, a danger there from blood internally. And also, there's indications that he might have been shot in another place, but not so seriously. Do you have any more information on his condition?
Right. We're being told right now they opened up his ribs. Roger Reddy is standing by and has just learned of the condition of the governor, so we'll turn it over to Roger Reddy. Roger?
The governor's condition, Tom, is reported serious by hospital spokesman right now. They opened up his chest and discovered 4 broken ribs and a bruised lung. The lung had collapsed, but they reinflated it. Governor Connolly received transfusions. His condition is reported, as we said, serious. However, the spokesman at the hospital said that his situation is not completely out of the woods, but that he has an excellent chance because of the fact that his pulse is good, his heartbeat is strong. There was no damage to any of the major arteries of the heart area. He was shot by a bullet that entered in his back and came out through his right chest.
Well, may I ask, I'm sorry I'm not immediately aware of this. I believe he's a rather strong man, virile and young. What, do you, either one of you know his age, Governor Connolly?
Yes, his general condition of health was reported good. He was strong. His age is in his favor, and his condition of health was in his favor at the time of the shooting. And the fact that he was not hit directly in the heart is going to help his chances to survive.
Oh, we're glad to know that.
At our hands his age, but probably was around 45, 46, somewhere around there.
That was our impression, that he was about the age of the president, which was 46. And now, gentlemen, we have an emergency report coming in from Europe. Come in, will you please? Welshengen in Bonn, Germany.
How are you, Morgan?
Yes, Bonn.
The reaction here is, of course, as stunned as anywhere else. There's also something more. The West Germans have just ordered all their armed forces on what they call alert condition number 1. That is the highest alert short of all-out war. The reason is that they fear an aggressive Russian move in the wake of the president's assassination.
Well, certainly they are closer to the danger of war in Europe than any other nation, and always have been. And this is an understandable alert, but they do not expect any sudden decision on the part of the Russians, do they?
Well, they seem to be very fearful, Morgan. There has been no unusual activity on the border or on the Berlin Wall since the news of the president's death came in. But the West Germans are in a very awkward position. Their defense minister is now on the high seas en route to the United States, where he was due to call on the president and other American officials. And the new chancellor, Ludwig Erhard, is, as you know, on his way back from Paris. He's due just about this time at the Bonn railway station after a 2-day visit with General de Gaulle in Paris. And, of course, the West Germans are very nervous with all their leadership out of town, out of the country, and so they have ordered this alert, even though, as you say, there's no immediate cause in the sense of intelligence information to justify it.
Yes, but as we have noted before, the Russians themselves have shown a great deal of ignorance of the continuity of government of the United States, despite the fact that they know the physical aspects of it. Therefore, it is not an unwise thing to stress and emphasize that the free world and its allies are not in any way discommoded, even though we are in the midst of personal and national tragedy. Anything further to report, Wells?
Well, the former Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, who was, also retired only last month from his office and who has had certain differences with Mr. Kennedy, came up with a very warm tribute tonight. He said that the president's work will live in history. He said Mr. Kennedy has given his life for freedom and peace. The socialist leader, the SPD, Socialist Party leader here in Bonn, has said that the event is one of the most shocking in the last decade. He is Herbert Wehner, a former communist, but now bitterly anti-communist. He leads the opposition here in Bonn. Generally, the feeling here is, I think, perhaps stronger than anywhere else in Europe because, of course, the president's visit in June made a tremendous impact in Germany, especially in Berlin, where he made his famous I Am a Berliner speech in front of the West Berlin City Hall. The people were weeping openly tonight in West Berlin and also here in West Germany. Defense Ministry employees, by the way, have been summoned from their homes, and they are now filing into the Defense Ministry, which is in an old Nazi Wehrmacht barracks on the edge of Bonn, to take up night-long vigils as part of the alert condition or mobilization condition number 1 that has been ordered by the West German government.
Anything further, or are you through for the moment?
That's about it right now. The German television has canceled all its programs. They're playing simply solemn music. And in the meantime, the 400,000-man German army, which, by the way, is the largest in Europe except for our own, is moving into mobilization positions all along the 800-mile border that separates East and West Germany. And our own troops in West Berlin and West Germany are also on an alert, although we understand it's not of the highest grade. In other words, it's not the all-out alert that has been sounded for the West German forces themselves.
Thank you, Wells Hangen, NBC News in Bonn. You may be interested to know that all radio stations throughout Western and Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe, of course, includes the satellite powers of Russia, all radio stations of Europe broadcast only funeral music after announcing the death of President Kennedy by assassination. Television stations kept up a steady flow of bulletins and canceled regular programs. Church bells tolled in many capitals. We switch now, once again, to Dallas, Texas, to WFAA. Tom Perryman, will you come in?
Yes, we will, Morgan. Governor Connolly was shot 3 times. A bullet entered his right arm, his left leg, and the back. He is reported in very, very serious condition, but not critical condition. Also, we have 2 of our newsmen at the mic right now. Both were there when the president was shot. I would like for you to hear the comments of Mel Couch and Pierce Allman. Mal, could you tell us what you saw?
Yes, I was in the 8th car in the motorcade. There were 5 other newsmen, myself, in this car. We just rounded a corner, and the president's car was heading out of downtown proper. We were at right angles to the president's car, about approximately 50 to 75 feet away. I heard this shot, or what it sounded like at the moment, to be a motorcycle backfiring, and I heard another one, and by the 3rd shot, it sounded, by then, the men in the car realized that it was not a motorcycle, but it was someone firing. Our car rounded the corner just as the president's car sped off down underneath an underpass and out onto what is known as Stemmons Expressway. I looked to the left of me as a policeman fell, pulled his pistol. To the right of me, 2 citizens dropped to the ground, and I had a chance to take a quick shot of the window from whence the assassin fired his weapon.
That was an eyewitness report from Mal Couch, WFAA TV newsman. Pierce Allman also was nearby when the president was shot. Can you add anything briefly, Pierce?
Not at all, Tom. I heard the 3 shots. I glanced. The president was down in the car. I thought he was ducking, which was a natural reaction. And Jackie was just beginning to clutch at him, and he and Jackie, then the car sped off, and I ran over to the Texas School Book Depository building where the shots occurred. And I didn't see anybody run out or run past. We just got back from there.
That's the story from here, Morgan.
Thank you. I would like to note at this time we have word from the White House Secret Service detail about the confusion surrounding those who died along with the president. The White House Secret Service detail denies that any Secret Service man was killed in the Dallas assassination. Now, that's the report that's been bothering us from the beginning of this report to you on the assassination of President Kennedy, because we did know and had confirmation that a Dallas policeman had been shot. And, of course, the man apparently connected with that has been arrested in a theater. At least the man by the name of Oswald, a young man, black curly hair, has said it's all over now. But anyway, the Dallas policeman has been shot. There has been no Secret Service man shot. Incidentally, the Secret Service detail in the White House announces that Speaker John McCormick of the House of Representatives has now received a Secret Service guard. He is next in line for the presidency behind Lyndon Baines Johnson, who has been sworn in as President of the United States and is now en route to Washington. The Police Department of Dallas, Texas, reports that Lee H. Oswald, who was arrested in a theater in the outskirts of that city soon after the assassination of President Kennedy, is the prime suspect in the assassination of the president. They identify Lee H. Oswald, this curly black-haired man in his 20s as a chairman of a Fair Play for Cuba committee. Now, in that connection, it is interesting to note what the Fair Play for Cuba committee is in the United States, or the various committees that were formed in universities primarily a couple of years ago. I happen to have reported the Fair Play for Cuba committee formation. This committee was originally formed with $5,000 traced directly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation from the hands of the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Raul, to an American, and it was intended to build a backfire against the government of the United States here. Now, this does not indict all Fair Play for Cuba committees, but the fact is that Fidel Castro was the father of the Fair Play for Cuba committee idea in the United States, and the proof is complete and absolute from beginning to end. So we repeat the bulletin just received from Dallas, Texas. Lee H. Oswald, a young man in his 20s, black curly hair, was arrested in the theater in Dallas as the prime suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy. He scuffled with the police. He wounded one of the police. And when he was finally subdued after a pistol was taken away from him, he said, well, it's all over now. So all of the evidence points to the fact that the police of Dallas are on the track of a very tragic connection involving the death of the President of the United States. There was a slight further detail on that point. Oswald worked in the building from which the shots were fired at the President. His supervisor said he was there at noon. That was a warehouse about 8 stories high. The shot was fired from a 5th or a 6th-story window. That has not been definitely determined yet. And there were workmen in the building refurbishing it for some reason or another. There were no tenants at the time in the building. So Oswald was a worker in this building, and he had been there at noon, was seen there by his supervisor at that time. The man's name is Lee H. Oswald. He's been identified as a chairman of a Fair Play for Cuba committee, and the Fair Play for Cuba committee was formed with money, dollars, supplied directly by Fidel Castro through his foreign minister, who was then in the United Nations about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And we now have what at least is an indirect connection with the situation. As we've reported to you, maybe we have more detail on this now. Let's take a try for it. We switch once again to Dallas, Texas, WAFAA.
Thank you,
Tom Parrigan.
Morgan. A man has been arrested, Lee Oswald, a 24-year-old man who said 2 years ago he wanted Russian citizenship, is being questioned to see whether he had any connection with the assassination of President Kennedy. Under questioning now by police, reliable sources indicate he's the man, according to the questions that have been asked and the way he has answered them. The rifle that was used to kill the president has been picked up by police. Ballistics tests are being undertaken at this time. Oswald was an Oak Cliff, Dallas man, Oak Cliff, a section of Dallas, and he's undergoing questioning now, and sources that we have talked to indicate that he is the man. That's the latest story from here, Morgan.
Thank you very much, Tom. Right alert and on the job. Just as we get the official bulletin from the Police Department of Dallas, we have confirmation that this man had asked for Russian citizenship. I believe you said as recently as 2 years ago. And now we have more detail on the arrest of the prime suspect in the assassination of President John Kennedy. We return to a conversation with Tom Perriman, station WFAA in Dallas, Texas. Will you come in, Tom?
Morgan, federal officers have been going over the man very closely for a considerable period of time now. The witnesses to the president's assassination are in the next room at police headquarters, but they have not yet looked at the man. As we told you, the rifle used for the president's assassination has been recovered and is undergoing fingerprint analysis at this time. Now, the report to us is now that Oswald was picked up in New Orleans not long ago and fined $10 for distributing communist literature. That's the latest story on Oswald. He has not been charged yet, but is undergoing rigid interrogation at Dallas Police Headquarters.
Well, it is significant that the police and the federal authorities are taking their time. They're giving us identifications of this man as at least a fellow traveler, probably a communist. He is identified by the police as a chairman of a Fair Play for Cuba committee, a group formed directly by money furnished by Fidel Castro through his foreign ministry, and now we learn additional detail of a communist-type background. Let's go again to WFAA in Dallas, to Tom Perryman. Will you come in, Tom?
The report we have right now is that Governor Connolly, also shot, is reported in satisfactory condition. Dr. Robert Shaw says he'll have to stay in the hospital at least 2 weeks. Also, we have an eyewitness report to the shooting, and would like for you to hear that now.
I am L.J. Lewis, 500 East Jefferson Avenue in Oakville. And we were sitting in the office here, and we heard the shots. And I just casually made a remark. I said, I bet they have him cornered. And so I looked up the street and saw the suspect coming down the street, and he was reloading his revolver and stuck it in his belt when he got, just across the street from us. And he turned and went up the street, and I immediately phoned the police, and one of the boys here in the office, Warren Reynolds, and Pat Patterson, they followed the suspect up the street where he turned behind the service station and to the alley. I immediately phoned the police, and Warren and Pat Patterson, followed the suspect on up the street. And after that, it's just a matter of time, till all the police and everything were around here.
We have now a rare opportunity that comes in history for an eyewitness of this caliber, Senator Ralph Yarborough, a man competent, highly able to observe thoroughly, an opportunity to hear him say exactly what happened from his point of view, because he was in the motorcade directly behind the president. We take you now to Nancy Dickerson, NBC News, Washington.
Yarborough, you've just returned on the presidential jet, come back from Texas, Dallas this morning. Could you describe the situation to us in the cavalcade when you were there and what happened after the shots were fired?
Well, they were booming shots. You could tell they were not firecrackers or pistols. They were either rifle shots or small bombs. But the Secret Service men were between the car that I was in with Vice President Johnson and Mrs. Johnson. We couldn't tell immediately what was going on, but after the first two shots, the Secret Service man in the front seat whirled to us and told us to get down. And you could tell that something very terrible was happening.
And then what happened? Did you all go to the hospital?
The cavalcade immediately speeded up at a very high speed and raced. It was some miles to the hospital. They raced past the place where the noon meeting was to be held, past the mark where thousands of people were gathered inside, and went directly to the hospital at a terrible rate of speed. This was a deed without a name. This was one of the most horrible crimes in American history, and it takes away the most brilliant leader I've ever known at a crucial time in the history of the world. This is an unspeakable tragedy to the family and to the nation.
Senator Yarborough, were you with President Kennedy talking with him this morning before this occurred?
Oh, before the cavalcade. Oh, yes, I've talked with him. He was optimistic and enthusiastic about things in Texas. The crowds were so great. The people that turned out with such great greetings. There were so many more than were there when he came in 1960, and so much more enthusiastic. It was, someone said that, well, Mrs. Kennedy was enjoying it too. The people wanted to see her so, and the crowds were so vast and so cheerful and so glad to see her and to see him.
Did you see her, Mrs. Kennedy, afterwards at the hospital?
Yes, I saw Mrs. Kennedy after that. I think the whole nation, the whole world sorrows with her at the loss of her husband, the father of our children, and this great leader of this nation and the free world. This is the saddest day I've known in American history, my lifetime.
Thank you very much, Senator Yarborough. This is Nancy Dickerson of NBC News at Andrews Air Force Base.
It is very important that so many people disagree. It happens in automobile accidents. Why shouldn't it happen in other events that are not exactly accidents? It is important that so many disagree as to how many shots were fired. We now are advised officially from the hospital, and no doubt the autopsy on the President's body tonight in Bethesda Naval Hospital near Washington will bear this out, that the President was shot twice. Now, it has been reported before that Governor John Connally, with him in the car, was shot twice, and yet witnesses heard only 3 shots. We do know for sure that the President has been shot twice. It is possible that one of the shots of the 3 also struck the governor, or maybe 2. But in any event, he has been shot twice. And, by the way, they have operated on Governor John Connally. A lung has been reinflated that had collapsed as a result of the wounds. He has been shot in the back, one of the major shots. But it is still the report in Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas, that Governor John Connally is, while he's in serious condition, is not in critical condition, and that he continues to show improvement at this time. Incidentally, the President's body was brought to Washington in a bronze casket. It was placed in a military ambulance to be taken to the Naval Hospital at Bethesda. It will remain there during the night for the autopsy, which, as we reported to you before, is routine in such official deaths, as the President of the United States, in circumstances that are beyond the natural. And a full and complete report will be in the history books of the nation concerning the manner of the death and the cause of the death, the accurate details of the President of the United States. That's why the body was taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital near Washington. It will go to the White House tomorrow morning, where it will lie in repose for the private mourning of the family and for those who were close to the Kennedy family, either in the official family of the cabinet and others, or in the Congress. But this is a private act. The body in repose at the White House. Later it will be taken to the Capitol, where it will lie in the rotunda for the public, lying in state for the tribute of the nation at large.